You see it?
Yes. So this ball, which is about the size of a BB, is very...
Would you like to levitate, Michael?
I would love to, every day.
Wouldn't it be good? Would you like to levitate, Michael?
I would love to, every day.
Wouldn't it be good? Wouldn't it be good? Well, today on Field Notes, I'm going to give you that a chance. There's a couple of caveats, small ones. Don't worry about them. We'll come to them in a bit. But I've got a little acoustic levitator with me.
Oh, really?
Have you ever played with one of these?
I have, but one that was so small, it could only levitate like a tiny little bead of styrofoam, polystyrene, for those of you across the Atlantic, and it was so undramatic.
That's exactly what I've got.
Oh, no. Does it also make this noise that's like, ee! And you're like, oh, please. Okay.
Yeah, I've got that and some calculations.
Let me say, I've never played with one, but I don't believe it's possible, especially something as cool to levitate as styrofoam.
Oh, I got something.
So that's what you brought me. You brought me a sonic levitator.
And some calculations about how many of these things you need to levitate you.
Okay, so what a wonderful intro. Aren't you excited to show this to me now?
I've never backed myself more, Michael. This is... I should have managed your expectations a bit better, shouldn't I, really? I should have said...
Yeah, I think so. But I will say that I've experienced it, but I think that you talking about it and explaining it will show me why it is so cool.
This area is what happens when you get overly enthusiastic about digging up gold. Or, in this case, natural gas. Hard to blame those folks. All this money just waiting to be made. Too bad that when all the gas is gone, you get an empty cave that collapses. Who would have thought? Well, they didn't. You can set your first base up in the nearest town to the south. Drive on over there and look for a good spot.
We'll see, shall we? Okay. A friend of mine at Cambridge University has been toying around with this little acoustic levitator. Incidentally, actually, you know, maths departments are completely full of people who care a lot about acoustics. Did you know this?
Yes, I bet.
Like jet engines, for example, when they were first created, they were so noisy that for starters, it was like completely unworkable for commercial flight. But secondly, the vibrations were so dramatic that they would break the components inside of the engine. And who did they turn to make them all quiet? The mathematicians, my friend.
Right.
There is a guy who, a mathematician who works in the same department as me, who is now working on a car seat that essentially works as noise cancellation for the road around you. Doesn't that sound nice?
Oh, wow. Is it safe? I feel like I need to hear some of these noises.
Do you? I think maybe if you're a passenger, maybe it's not for the driver.
Okay.
Anyway, there's just a lot of people who are working on acoustics, and one of them has got this little acoustic levitator. So here is the acoustic levitator. It's in a little 3D printed box. My friend is Matthew Nethercoat, by the way, who let me steal this in order to impress you, Michael, which was. I'll try a lot harder next time. Let me put it that way. Okay.
No. This looks cool. This looks cooler than the one that I've seen. It's like a hand-sized.
Like a hand-sized thing.
And it looks like some kind of Star Trek teleporter.
It does, yeah. So you've got two bits. One.
That's your first base of operations sorted. Well done. Now we peruse the old to-do list. My favorite part. And I'm sure yours. So, first things first. You need to set up a convoy path from the nearest tunnel to the countryside base. Then, check out the emergency report we received from Waterfold Estate Orange Farm. Who knows what happened there, so be careful. I'd stay on the lookout for falling oranges specifically. The last thing on the list is replacing the damaged fuel tanks in Sirocco. I bet the locals will be grateful for this one in particular.
one at the top, one at the bottom, and inside there's a dome, effectively, that's filled with lots and lots of tiny little speakers that are all pointing towards this kind of central space. Sort of, how can you describe it? I never watched Star Trek, but isn't there some device in there where you teleport people? You can sort of imagine stepping in here and being teleported. I think that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah, right. But those are speakers pointed up and down, focused on some point in the very middle in between them.
The idea here then is that sound is a wave, right? Sound is like, you have this membrane on a speaker that vibrates backwards and forwards. And as it does so, it pushes and then pulls the air that surrounds it, creating this wave. Now, if you have all of these speakers that are tuned to exactly the right frequency and pointing in exactly the right way, then what should happen is that in some places, the vibrations will sort of add up together, and in some places, those vibrations will cancel each other out, so that you should get some little, effectively, jail cells in here of air, where the air is perfectly still, while all the air around it is like vibrating like crazy. This episode is brought to you by Cancer Research UK.
Dinosaurs walked the Earth 180 million years ago. But did you know cancer was part of their story too? Scientists have found tumors in ancient fossils.
Well, that is a part of the reason why cancer is a big part of our story, right? It's the other side of evolution. It's the most complex disease that we face. There are more than 200 types of cancer in total, each with distinct characteristics, challenges, and mysteries.
And that complexity demands scale. Cancer Research UK is the world's largest charitable funder of cancer research, with more than 4,000 scientists, doctors, and nurses working across more than 20 countries in the search for answers, and then sharing their discoveries beyond borders.
And the impact of this collaboration is clear, because over the last 50 years, the charity's pioneering work has helped to double cancer survival in the UK. That is more people who are living longer, better lives.
Fossils can show us the past, but research is shaping the future. And for more information about Cancer Research UK, their research, breakthroughs, and how you can support them, visit cancerresearchuk.org/restiscience.
If I just turn it on, hang on a second. Let's turn this on.
That box that you've just turned on also looks really cool.
It's cute, isn't it? This is
It's got red LEDs in it, so it looks really high tech, and it's exposed, so I can see all the electronics inside.
spacey.
So is it running now? Is it producing the sound?
It is, which I can't hear. I assume you can't hear, but
I can't hear it either.
100 meters down the road, there are several dogs that are now crying because it is so high pitched.
Very high pitched. Okay, so the idea is that sound waves are compressed. They're waves of air that's being compressed and rarefied. And if you get two compressed waves side to side, you can hold something in the air.
Exactly, where it's not actually touching anything else. Okay, so I have here a little bowl of can you see these? They're little beads.
Oh yeah, little beads, and they're made out of polystyrene.
Polystyrene. These are the aforementioned beads. Now, okay, right. If you pop this in here, ordinarily, right, it just drops. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Not that interesting. But if you pop them in here, then something quite interesting happens, which is that they start to sit. You just drop it there and it will fall and then be suspended. Can you see it?
Yes. So this ball, which is about the size of a BB, is very stably suspended in the air.
So what I really like about this, okay, is that you can basically explore where these different nodes are. My record thus far is 9. Ooh.
Now, could you change the frequency of the sound with this device and change where these levitation points are?
Not this one, unfortunately. I think I need to write to Matthew Nethercoat and tell him he needs to make a more impressive device.
I'm not down on this. I think it's really cool. I think it looks really neat.
I know what you're thinking. That sounds fun, but I want to go. I want you to levitate me. Or at least an ant, that would be
Well, yeah, no, I've seen them levitate living frogs in laboratories with very powerful versions of this. And I'm wondering what the applications are beyond the amusement.
Well, okay, let's stick on the fun for a second here, because let's say the average human weighs about, I don't know, what do you reckon, 75 kilograms, something like that? That's what I've done with my calculations. This particular levitator has 72 little transducers right around here. So if you wanted to raw power lift a human, you are going to need 216 million of them, which is, I would say, quite a lot.
That's a lot, but let's say you did it.
Let's say you did it.
Would you be able to hear the sound, or would it still be ultrasonic?
Well, here's the thing. You need them to be like super, super loud, right? In order to actually have the sort of strength between them to be able to lift this human. You can get them up to about 120 decibels, but remember, you've got 216 million of them. Now, the slight problem is that any sound above 170 decibels can cause organ and joint damage, just because it vibrates you so violently that you start to implode. Anything above 240 decibels, that would be lethal.
Wow.
And so at 216 million, I think that the reality is we could levitate you. It would be so loud your head might explode. Small caveat.
It's worth it. It's worth it.
You wanted drama? My God, I can give you drama. So, okay, this is like a cute little fun toy that you can play with. But there is actually a reason behind this stuff. So in the 1960s, 1970s, NASA, they developed these kind of levitators, partly because they wanted to see what it would be like to have effectively a microgravity environment.
Oh, yeah.
You can imagine if you were like suspending, instead of tiny little balls here, you were suspending cells or like other sort of organic matter. It's effectively the same as like being suspended in zero gravity. You're not going to feel the force of the earth because it's counteracted by this little cage of air that is wrapped around it. You can also put liquids in this, which is kind of interesting, but there are some quite interesting medical applications of this stuff. If people have kidney stones in their body, what you can do is with acoustic beams is nudge small fragments of kidney stones. You sort of break them up with ultrasound and then you nudge them into positions in the body where they can sort of be naturally cleared. There's also, this is the one that I really like, you can have targeted drug delivery with this. So you can create a sort of micro bubble, load it up with a drug. You can inject it, but then if you want to move it to very specific areas of the body and then burst the bubble using ultrasound to release the medication. And this is particularly useful if you have something like chemotherapy, for instance. So some sort of like drug that has like a really bad toxicity and you want to reduce the side effects that it can interact with other parts of your tissue on the way to the bit that it actually wants to interact with. There's also like this idea that you can use these kind of acoustic levitators. I mean, essentially what you have here is like a beam of sound that moves stuff.
Yeah, and it can move anything made of matter, whereas trying to move things around in a body with like magnets or something would require what you're moving to respond to the magnet. And they're ultrasonic, so they don't bother us.
Yeah, just the neighborhood dogs.
Yeah.
The other thing, so I mean, in general, moving things around the body, you can also use this for pill-sized cameras. So you swallow a little camera, then you want to move it around the digestive system, for instance. You can use these kind of acoustic beams to move it all around the body.
Right, a little micro cinematographer could make a movie in my body controlling with sound waves. And sound waves could be a lot harder to jam than like radio waves.
In what way? Go on.
Well, I mean, like if you want to control something remotely using radio waves, there's going to be some limitations on when you can use those and through what mediums, but perhaps sound can fill in the gaps.
Because if you think about it, if you happen to be swallowed by a human and we're sitting inside of their stomach and someone was shouting from outside, you would expect to hear it. Like the sound vibration would still get inside. In fact, actually, you know that whole thing about babies when they're in their mother's stomachs, there's certain frequencies which they hear that end up being really soothing.
Yeah. And there's things that they see as well. Like skin is not completely opaque. the growing, developing baby in the womb isn't in darkness, especially if the mom's topless in bright sunlight. It's like kind of like red in the womb. Oh, wow. To the human eye, yeah. Yeah, and they've done studies where they've projected, like using lasers, different shapes onto the womb that the baby could see.
Yeah.
This is, of course, a baby that's developed enough to have a retina, and the babies react to shapes. In fact, they're seen to react to and look at and stare longer at shapes that are similar to a human face. Like, it's instinctive.
Wow.
I'm being serious. Like, this pattern right here, they don't seem to care very much about. Okay, that's 3 dots in a triangle shape. But they will, for like twice as long, follow and look at an upside down triangle of dots, which is like two eyes and a mouth.
I mean, it's essentially like I always think in terms of a British plug whenever I see this experiment. It's sort of like hold a British plug in the correct orientation, baby don't care. Turn it upside down, baby cares.
Really? Of course.
I've only seen it for babies that have been born.
No, yeah, well, apparently it would work on a prenatal baby. What can they hear? Could they hear this? Like, is this frequency that this machine's running at, is it something that like teenagers can hear but not old people?
Like the mosquito noise or the...
Yeah.
Did you have that in the States where they had a device that was designed to stop teenagers from hanging out in public areas?
Yeah, and I experienced one at this show I did, where I was like, why is there that buzzing noise out here? And all the guys working there were like, oh, you can hear it. I don't know if I could hear it still. This was years ago, but I was really proud that I could still hear this noise. It's supposed to scare away, or not scare away, it was supposed to annoy juvenile delinquents.
Well, this thing is about 20,000 hertz, so it's quite possible that young children could hear this. I have a young child in my house. Shall I go and ask them?
Well, yeah, let's do an experiment.
Shall I for real?
Yeah, and see if they can guess when it's on or off, to see if they're getting it. Okay, here's our test subject.
He's our test subject, okay. I want you to have a listen and see. You tell me when you can hear it. Can you hear that?
Yes.
Can you hear that?
No.
Oh. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Can you? I can't hear that. I can't hear any of these.
Wow, super kid.
Super kids, 19,000 hertz you went up to. I stopped at about 12,000.
But this acoustic levitator that you've got, it's using 20,000 hertz.
It's 22,000.
22? Wow. Okay, so it's shaking the air 22,000 times a second, creating waves of compressed air separated by rarefied air. Mm-hmm. And these waves like collide from the top and bottom. And what's going on? The compressed waves can sync up and create an even more compressed wave. And if a rarefied area and a compressed one meet, they just make normal air.
Exactly.
And this somehow creates like a cage of air pressure that can hold very lightweight objects.
Exactly. Try and put something in that's much larger and it'll just flop around all over the place and eventually fall. But if you get something that's the right size and not too heavy so that it doesn't sort of overwhelm the force that's being exerted by the surrounding air pressure, then yeah, you can have it successfully levitate. I mean, I always thought levitation was a bit of a science fiction myth, but it turns out it actually isn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, I got stuck on defining levitation because this isn't levitation. It's using the force of air pressure to resist gravity.
How dare you? It's not touching the ground, Michael. You're being way too strict with your definition.
Okay, so then what about, do airplanes levitate? They're not touching the ground.
Shush now. Let's go to a break.
Okay, let's go to a break.
This episode is brought to you by Cancer Research UK.
Every second, your cells release millions of microscopic signals, fragments of DNA, tiny molecules, little molecular whispers.
And scientists are trying to work out how to read them. It's called a liquid biopsy. And this is a test that looks for these tiny little traces of cancer through the body's fluids, often long before symptoms of cancer itself actually end up appearing.
So today we're asking, can you really detect cancer from clues floating around in blood, urine, spit, and tears?
Short answer, yes. Longer answer,
How?
Okay. I mean, this is it, right? Because, okay, cancer doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It leaves these molecular fingerprints in your body, this long before symptoms end up showing. These little fragments of DNA, these proteins, other little molecules that end up floating around your body, in your bloodstream, for example, as your cells are dividing, as they're growing, and as they're dying. Like a sort of internal messaging system, and whether you can tap into it.
And the challenge is sensitivity, because you've got a lot of cells that are not cancer.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole load of stuff floating around your body.
Well, Cancer Research UK researchers are building tools sensitive enough to detect these markers.
Yeah, these faint little signals, and detect them even earlier. And this is different. This is separate from traditional biopsies, right? Which kind of go in, it means surgery, it means needles, it means you take tissue samples from a suspected tumour or the surrounding tissue around the tumour. And that is amazing, but it really only gives you a snapshot of one tiny area of the body at that one moment in time.
But a liquid biopsy is less intrusive, and it's liquid that has come in contact and can contain traces from all over the body.
Yeah, like one breath, which is collecting up the molecules that have traveled around your entire body, or urine or blood tests.
It's a quiet revolution, right? It is testing the blood and other bodily fluids instead of the tumor without surgery.
And the key thing is that because those fragments, because they can come from different parts of the tumor, it means that just a small sample, you can put these clues together and you can get a really full picture of what's going on inside.
One thing I think is really cool is that platelets, which like we've all heard about, they're the things that help you heal when you get cut. They block off the blood flow so the healing can begin. Platelets really help with this search because they also suck up these molecular traces in the blood.
Yeah, these things act like little hoovers, right? They're picking up tiny bits of tumor DNA, all those circulate around the body and concentrating them. And I mean, they can help us unlock overlooked cancer clues.
Exactly, and the MRD Edge technology is more like an amplifier that can make the really quiet traces loud enough for researchers to find.
The whole thing about this, liquid biopsies, this isn't just a theory, this is something that's already being trialled in hospitals to monitor how well cancer treatments are already working.
Yeah, the aim is precision, knowing exactly when a treatment works, when to switch course, and when cancer might return, so doctors can always be one step ahead.
And Cancer Research UK, they come into this by connecting the lab work, doing the data science, the clinical trials that make all of this stuff possible.
So it's discovery that's happening, it's in motion, it's innovation beginning to make its way towards everyday care.
Of course, the goal here is that you can spot cancer early and then tailor every single decision around the individual person based on what's going on in their body at that moment in time.
That's right, doctors can detect and be aware of the smallest changes so that they can adjust treatment in real time.
Yeah, rather than having long stretches between biopsies, for example. And this shifts medicine from being just reaction to prediction as well. Instead of waiting for symptoms to arrive, you can get one step ahead.
And the same science that spots cancers earlier could become part of routine checkups.
Yeah, much less invasive, much more predictive. I mean, you can imagine a future where you go and have a blood test and it is as routine as, I don't know, getting your car in for a service, only this blood test is monitoring everything that's going on in your body and could potentially save your life.
So Cancer Research UK's researchers are bringing the future closer. They're turning detection into protection.
And what is remarkable is just how quickly this field is moving. You are getting discovery beginning to shift from the lab into hospitals, and when we learn to read the body's signals, we can get ahead of cancer. We can have the best shot at beating it.
For more information about Cancer Research UK, their research, breakthroughs, and how you can help them, visit cancerresearchuk.org/restiscience.
All right, we're back and we're going to answer some questions from you. I want to start with this great question from Neil, who asked, will a person ever swim faster than a shark?
No. Next question.
Whoa.
These tanks look intact and should fit right in when we deliver them to Sirocco. And if you're still worried about ownership, don't be. We're not stealing them. We're just borrowing them. And not even for ourselves, but for the good folk of Sirocco, who will owe us a big one, and they'll pick up the bill later. So, put your guilty conscience to rest, and get to work.
Whoa, wait a second. This is one of those questions that suffers from the problem of being a bit too broad. Like, what do you mean by a shark?
Yeah.
Like, there are sharks that swim really slowly. The Greenland shark only swims at about 1 mile per hour.
Wow.
That's about 0.34 meters per second.
That's extremely slow. Isn't that the one that's also like 400 years old?
Yeah. And so I could outswim one of them, but I can't outlive them. Maybe it's a balancing scale. And the fastest human speed is like almost 2.5 meters per second.
How does that convert to miles an hour?
About 5.5 miles per hour.
Yeah, that's pretty good. You could definitely outrun a Greenland. Is that with or without fins?
That's without fins. That's just using the flesh your mother gave you.
What I will say is I can definitely not swim that fast. That's a sort of Michael Phelps territory.
No, it definitely is like a very unique speed to be traveling at.
I also want to know how motivated the shark is. So I sort of feel like even fast sharks, whatever the fastest shark might be, what do you reckon the fastest shark is? Not a hammerhead. They're aerodynamically useless.
Google says the fastest shark is the short fin mako,
Right.
which can travel at 31 to 46 miles per hour in the water.
Well. This is a whole jumble of units we've got going on here, isn't it?
That's a whole jumble. How many fathoms per day?
Knots per month.
Look, what I love about the question, though, is that it's framed by asking, will a person ever swim faster than a shark? As though human swim speed is something that is changing and it's getting better and better. And in some ways it is. This also belies that kind of like that modern sensibility that like things are just going to get better and stronger and records keep getting broken. And in some ways it is true. Like we do learn more about nutrition and swimming techniques and also swimming technologies like fins and swimsuits. I think there were some swimsuits that were allowed in Beijing at the Olympics that are no longer allowed, but because they were allowed for that one Olympics event, a bunch of records were set.
Yeah.
And so we're at the point where the limits of human bodies are now being augmented and we're going beyond it.
Because I think that's the thing, actually, particularly about swimming, is that you have to wear a swimsuit, right? You can't do nudie swimming. That would just not be okay. And so you have to have some kind of, designed object on your body.
What do you mean you can't swim naked?
I mean, you can if you want to, but maybe not in competition in the Olympics.
Right.
Maybe not at 2.5 meters per second, Michael. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
But those particular swimsuits, they had a couple of design features. So one was that, because what you really want to do is you want to basically have your butt higher in the water, like as high in the water as you can. So they had like some elements of buoyancy in them.
Oh.
They also, along the sort of skin of the swimsuit, they had like sort of microscopic design which allowed the water to slip over it much easier, so that you didn't get this sort of any resistance or drag on the surface. And then I think also they were basically like Spanx. They were basically like 4 sizes too small for the human that was wearing them to make them as streamlined as possible, sort of minimize their surface area.
Fascinating. Okay.
So all of those things, those things are... Oh, actually, one other thing about swimming, in fact, this idea that humans can swim faster as time goes on. So when I was...
Looking at this place, I shouldn't have said what I said about oranges. The damage is extensive. You'll need to restore the road to the farm and bring a backup generator to the main building. Then you'll need to open the river lock to reach the production site on the other side of the river. But to repair the river lock, you'll need some decking panels, which you can grab at the South Canyon Resort construction site. There won't be any resort construction here for a while, so use their crane and load up on those panels. If the crane has no power, just get a backup generator from a nearby building. And don't worry, we got permission for all of that.
As a kid and had swimming lessons, I was always taught that you're supposed to keep your hand, really... My hand looks so massive when I do it like that.
What are you sensitive about having hands that are too big?
People do something
You're
like,
like, look at my hand, everyone. My tiny, dainty hand. Just be proud of it. Okay, so what, you were taught to scoop or karate chop?
When I was a kid, swimming lessons, they would say that you have a flat palm and that your fingers are stuck together. But actually, now that I have a PhD in fluid dynamics, Michael, I know that is not true. I know that is not the best way to swim. Because, in fact, actually, if instead of having your hand flat, you have it sort of cupped, but also if your fingers are slightly further apart, what happens is that, for starters, you're just displacing more water by having your hand curved. So basically, if you have your hand in like a natural relaxed position, what happens is you get these little eddies that appear, this turbulence that appears between your fingers, that are, if you get it at the right distance, that are impenetrable to water going through. So you effectively increase the size of your hand by having your fingers slightly apart. basically you want to like think of your hand as these big scoops going through the water.
Right, and those eddy currents are almost like webbing made of water that stops water from going through. That's really cool.
So maybe science will make people swim faster.
I know. Watch out, Mako Shark. Thanks for the question, Neil. You want to take Ellie's question?
Yeah, go on. Ellie asks, if you had to invent a completely useless yet scientifically fascinating machine, what would do it? And what basic principle of physics or chemistry would it exploit?
Okay, I've had this idea for a long time. I want to build a clock that uses a titration process to tell time. So what you've got, in my mind, you've got like a beaker with some kind of solution in it, and you're dripping another chemical into it at a regular interval, like 1 drop per second. And you do this all day, all right? And the more of the above chemical falls into the one below, the more the color changes. So, for example, maybe it's becoming more and more red throughout the day. And then on the clock, there's a gradient from clear to red, and you just like turn it until it matches the color of the beaker, and that happens to be the time that it is. So to check the time, you just go, let's look at this. How red is it? And you move the dial until the reds match, and you go, oh wow, guys, it's afternoon now.
I like that so much. I've actually wanted something like an hourglass for a really long time that lasts much longer than an hour, right? I wanted one. You know, there's some things that you want to do every couple of weeks. Like every couple of weeks, maybe you want to water your plants, for example. And what I really wanted is a physical device that you can turn over, leave it, and then know when 2 weeks is up. Unfortunately, if you use sand or something, they end up being so gigantic that they're completely impractical. It's like the size of a room.
I know. Well, there's an hourglass in Japan that goes for an entire year.
Is there? How big is it?
It's really big, and it's supported way up on this giant metal truss. And on New Year's Eve every year, they turn it over. And it's beautiful, and it's one of my dreams to go and visit it.
Oh, that's incredible. But this idea of having a liquid that drops, I like this a lot, because there's that experiment, the pitch drop experiment. You know about this, I imagine?
Yeah, the longest running experiment.
Since 1927. So this is...
Wait, so it's going to be hitting its 100-year anniversary in a couple of years. That'll be a special moment.
Shall we work out a way to get the rest of science to go and visit it for its 100-year anniversary?
Yeah, we should do a special celebratory episode there as we watch it. For those who don't know, the pitch drop is an experiment looking at the viscosity of pitch, a material that is so not flowy that it pours out of the funnel that it's in, like, well, I mean, so slowly that it's been almost 100 years and it's still coming out.
Yeah. I think there's only been it's like tar, right? It's like the kind of thing that you would use to sort of waterproof your roof, like that kind of thing. There's about 1 drop every decade or so.
Wow.
I think that there's an online camera. I think that there's like a live feed.
A live feed?
Live stream. You should have a look. But I do also remember.
Yeah, the feed. Okay, so the experiment uses pitch that is 100 billion times more viscous than water.
Wow, that's incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Can I just read you? I want to. This is so fascinating.
Please.
In 1927, Professor Parnell heated a sample of pitch and poured it into a glass funnel with a sealed stem. He allowed the pitch to cool and settle for 3 years. And then in 1930, he cut the funnel's stem. And since then, the pitch has slowly dripped out of the funnel. It took 8 years for the first drop to fall, and more than 40 years for another 5 to follow. My gosh.
Parnell, though, he never got to see it, even though he was in the same building for decades. And when he died, I think no one had ever... You sort of know that it's happened, but you come back in and you're like, damn it, I missed the drop. And you've got to wait another 10 years. Someone who took over the experiment after Thomas Parnell was like completely obsessed with it. So was waiting like 40 years, set up loads of cameras, sometimes would sleep near the apparatus when he thought that a pitch was imminent.
Right.
In 1977, apparently, he left the lab for a few minutes and then the drop fell. And then in 1988, the next time, it fell again, but the camera had jammed. And then in 2000, he set up a webcam and the webcam crashed right before the drop. He's
No
half
way.
his career trying to see a single drop in the jar, and died without having seen it.
What a life. I feel like you could do a pitch drop experiment timer at home, and you would just set a knob to the temperature for the speed that you wanted, and you could set it for a fast speed or like remind me in 6 months.
Yeah. Let's invent that. I think that's something that
So I'm gonna write it down.
you could do. You could definitely do that. I'd like a 2-week pitch drop timer, please. Okay. Well, on that note, I'm going to go and water my plants and try and levitate some household items acoustically.
Oh, sounds like a fun time.
Very good. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Now later today, I'm going to be showing off a very rare physical monument of something we only ever experience as a split-second flash. That's my hook and tease for you, Michael.
Ooh, that's a good hook.
I know. Any guesses so far?
Is it like how photons travel?
I mean, there's photons involved, but you've got to stay tuned for the second half if you want to find out more. But for this first half, what we thought we'd do is we would dive into our mailbag. As ever, you can send us your questions. You can send us your own objects, your own thoughts, and sometimes feelings. But our first question today, Madhav has got a question. This I think is one for you, Michael. Why do mirrors flip us horizontally, but not vertically?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I've done a whole bunch of videos and TikToks about mirrors. And it is weird. How come when I approach a mirror, my right hand is on the left side and vice versa, but my head isn't where my feet should be? Why is it just doing this horizontally? And of course, the answer is it's not flipping you horizontally, it's flipping you inside out. Everything that you present to a mirror gets reflected right back. When you look at a letter R, you're like, yeah, that looks normal. But then you turn it to the mirror. You were the one who flipped it horizontally. You turned it. And it's just getting sent right back to you.
But also, if you lie down, it still knows that your left hand and your right hand and where your feet are. Like, if you make yourself horizontal, right, then it suddenly flips vertical. It suddenly makes your left hand your right hand, but your head is not switched with your feet.
Yeah.
So it's like, how does it know? How does it know that to only ever flip what's horizontal to you?
That's right. Yeah, if I turn the mirror, it continues this horizontal reversing. If I put myself upside down, it continues the horizontal reversing. Words are reversed right to left. They're not reversed vertically. They're not flipped over. And the answer is that the mirror isn't flipping anything. You are. You see, all mirrors do is give back exactly what hits them. And when I, say, have some text on my notepad and it looks normal, and then I turn it to a mirror, I'm the one who just turned it. Now, it's as though I'm looking through the paper, because that letter is hitting the mirror and it's coming back to me without being changed.
Because if you'd written on a piece of tracing paper and were holding it up and looking through the tracing paper, you would see exactly what is reflected back at you in the mirror. It would be unchanged, the sort of the backside of the tracing paper and what you're seeing in the mirror.
That's right. And so another way this has been explained is that mirrors actually flip things inside out. All right? You can think of it this way. When you look in a mirror, the closest thing to the mirror becomes the closest thing to you in the mirror image. So if my nose is closest to the mirror because I'm facing it, then that means that in my mirror reflection, the nose will be closer to me and the back of my head is behind my nose. So I've been pushed, literally my back and my front have been pushed through each other, seemingly, apparently, and now I'm looking at myself squished inside out.
You know, like those little suckers that you get that's sort of a stable and then you can pop them inside out?
Yeah.
It's a bit like that, right? It's like the mirror is doing that to you as a human. It's sort of like grabbing you by the nose and like popping you inside out.
That's right. So top and bottom, stay on the same axis. Right and left stay on the same axis. It's just that now the front and the back are in different orientations relative to left and right. And so we think, well, if I froze my mirror image and walked around to join it, to face in the same direction, it would be reversed. But no. You have reversed yourself by turning around to join it and face the other way.
I love that question. In general, I just really love like thinking very hard and long about things that feel like they should be obvious and then getting really confused. Great question. Absolutely great question.
Let's move on to a question from Brandon, who asks, how dense would a hamster have to be to become a black hole?
Okay, I cannot tell you how much fun I had this afternoon doing the calculations for this, because the answer is actually quite surprising, I think. This episode is brought to you by Cancer Research UK.
So when most people think of naked mole rats, their unusual relationship to cancer probably isn't the first thing that comes to mind.
But maybe it should be, because it is incredibly rare for them to develop cancer, which could be partly down to their unique immune system, or it might be the way that their cells respond to damage.
So scientists are studying their biology for its cancer-fighting secrets. It's a reminder that discoveries can sometimes come from places you don't expect.
Cancer Research UK is the world's largest charitable funder of cancer research. Thousands of scientists, of doctors and nurses work across more than 20 countries to help turn discoveries in the lab into new tests, new treatments, and new innovations.
And the impact is clear. Over the past 50 years, the charity's pioneering work has helped double cancer survival in the UK, meaning more people living longer, better lives, free from the fear of cancer.
For more information about Cancer Research UK, their research, their breakthroughs, and how you can support them, visit cancerresearchuk.org/rest is science. I looked up the average weight of a hamster. I've gone for, if you're interested, a chubby Syrian hamster, 150 grams. That's their general weight. If you wanted to turn one of those into a black hole, the problem is that you have to shrink it down to be so small that it's not just about squishing it, it's about obliterating the concept of space within it. Okay, so
excellent.
Here's the sort of breakdown, right? The Schwarzschild radius. This is a calculation. It's an equation that tells you how wide something needs to be before essentially it becomes a black hole. Before the density becomes so great that it becomes a black hole. So when you run the calculation for a hamster at 0.15 kilograms, you work out that the Schwarzschild radius is 2.2 times 10 to the minus 28 meters, okay, which is, I'm going to say it, small. To put that into perspective, a proton is 10 to the minus 15 meters.
Oh no, so you've got to squish all the hamster's mass into a volume smaller than a proton.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, size of atoms, forget it. That's like gigantically vast in comparison to the size this hamster's got to get down. It's got to be 10 trillion times smaller than a single proton. Which, if you want to put that in perspective, it's the hamster is to a proton at the moment what a grain of sand is to the entire Earth, basically, right? So it's going to be so small. So, okay, then the consequence of what happens when you do that is phenomenal.
Does it hurt the hamster?
I think we've got a sort of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids type smallizer machine.
Okay, I love it. Yeah,
hamster miniaturizer machine. I think the hamster's fine.
Imagine that the hamster is fine the whole time. It just like starts to realize, hey, my gravitational force is getting stronger. I've become a black hole. Dang it.
Damn it. Okay, I'm going to tell you the hamster is fine. Spoiler alert, not everyone else is. Just bear with me for a second, because here's the thing, right? To the density, we know what the hamster weighs. It's 150 grams of like fur and cheeks, but it's now squished into this subatomic speck, which means the density that's required is 3.3 times 10 to the 81 kilograms per meter cubed, okay? People can check my calculations on this if you like. But just to visualize that sort of crunch, water, 1,000 kilograms per meter cube. Steel, 8,000. The core of the sun, 150,000. A neutron star, which is the most densest object in the entire universe, is 10 to the 17 kilograms per meter cubed. Our hamster, remember, 10 to the 81. Okay, so basically it needs to be, many gazillions denser than a neutron star for this to work.
Well, sure. We're trying to make a black hole. Like, it's got to be denser than any regular matter.
Sure, but this is like even denser than that. Even denser than that. And the problem is that, okay, according to Hawking radiation, little black holes will evaporate over time. But this tiny little hamster black hole is going to be so unstable that it will probably only last for about 10 to the minus 26 seconds, right? So it barely exists. But what that means is that once it's down to this tiny size, it instantly converts its entire mass of 150 grams back into pure energy, right? And E equals mc squared.
Ouch.
So what this means is the moment that you finish miniaturizing your hamster, it would detonate, and the energy release would be about 3.2 megatons of TNT, which is about 200 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped in Hiroshima.
Yeah.
So, you can, if you want to, Brandon, but I would say don't.
Wow. If you turned your hamster into a black hole, you would create a nuclear bomb.
Probably be at least the end of the country you're in, if not wider. There'd be a nuclear winter that would wipe out much of the planet, I imagine.
Now, this hamster, during its tiny fraction of a second that it's a black hole, it will at least be free. It'll be able to leave its cage.
Yeah. Look, I think when people try and say that one small creature cannot make a difference, I think this is evidence to the contrary.
It depends how you define can. Look, I can imagine some, oppressed hamster saying, one of these days I will compress my mass into a size smaller than a proton, and then you'll all be sorry.
You'll all be sorry. Hey, you know what? I think we've just found a new plot for a new Pixar film.
Yeah, the hamster who became a black hole.
Yeah.
Copyright The Rest Is Science 2026.
Too right. Okay, speaking of shrinking objects down, I've got another question for you, Michael. This one's from Edward. He asks, I've heard that if the Earth was shrunk down to the size of a pool ball, it would be smoother than any other man-made object. Is this true? First of all, wouldn't be small enough to be a black hole.
No, it wouldn't. The Earth's Schwarzschild radius is, funny enough, I actually literally have it right here.
Yeah, we'd had this in gravity, right?
It'd be about, 0.8 centimeters. Yeah, so if all of Earth's mass existed in this volume, you could be so close to all that mass that even light couldn't escape. But if we're just shrinking it down to the size of a pool ball, we're still talking about something dangerous, denser than a neutron star, but not quite able to capture light. I think light could be, very bent by it. But, here's to answer your question, Edward. It would not be particularly smooth. In fact, the Earth squeezed down to the size of a pool ball would be about as rough as 320 grit sandpaper. So the next time you're at a hardware store, find the 320 grit and feel that. That's what a giant would feel if they grasped Earth. Now, the myth that the Earth is smoother than a pool ball comes from a misreading of the International Pool Association's rules. I don't know if that's the actual governing body, but they say a pool ball must be built with a diameter of 2.25 inches plus or minus 0.005 inches. All right, so that's 5 thousandths of an inch. And people have taken that to mean that a pool ball can have craters and bumps that are 5 thousandths of an inch. And at the scale of Earth, that would mean 28-kilometer high mountains and trenches. So, obviously, the Earth is smoother than a pool ball.
Right.
But that's not what the regulation means. The regulation isn't telling us about the texture. It's telling us about the spherical nature of the ball, how off, how oblate it can be. And so if you actually look at real pool balls, they have like sub-micron scratches on them for real. Like a really well-used, quite scuffed up pool ball is going to have these little tiny scratches that you can see under a microscope, and they correspond to bumps and crannies that are actually much smaller than the Marianas Trench on Earth or Mount Everest would be at that scale. So, sorry to say, the Earth is not smoother than a pool ball. It is as smooth as 320 grit sandpaper, which I'm trying to think of things in real life that would feel that way. I think maybe like...
Well, where is 320 on the spectrum? From like, if you start off with you know, the coarsest of all, where you're like just trying to get the surface down, what number's that?
If you're trying to like remove material, you're using an extra coarse sandpaper that could be like a 24, a 30, a 36. These things are like hilarious. It's almost like a saw, a piece of paper that's a saw. These are all macro grit sandpaper. You look at it and it looks like someone glued a bunch of rocks to some paper. But when you get into the they call them micro grit sandpapers, the very fine ones are about 240 grit. But for Earth's texture, we need extra fine.
Okay.
Between 320 and 360. So those are going to be, you know, used for wood polishing, to initiate polishing. The idea that a pool ball can have these 5,000th sized pits and craters, that's describing 120 grit, which is one of those, like, that'd be fine. That can't even remove varnish or paint on wood. It's so fine. But that's not Earth.
All right, okay, so this is sort of somewhere in the middle. So, I mean, if you sort of run your finger along this sandpaper, you know, it's not like your finger is sort of getting stuck as you're going. It's like you can run your finger across it. It's just you can also feel that it's not perfectly smooth.
Yes, you would say, wow, this is not smooth, for sure.
Right. Because the other one I've heard is that, is about the fingerprint. Have you heard this one?
What's this one?
That if you shrunk the Earth down to the size of a pool ball and a giant held it in their hand, then the craters and peaks of their fingerprint would be greater. I mean, I was making some quite strong assumptions about the the biological surface of this giant and the fingertips of this giant, but the craters in your fingerprint are greater than you see on Earth.
Yes, this is the thing. These are the numbers that I think you might have wanted. That human fingers can feel objects as small as 13 nanometers. Really? We are incredibly sensitive to the vibrations caused by touching an object like that. Which means that if your finger was the size of the Earth, you could touch the Earth and feel the difference between a house and a car.
No.
Our sense of touch is a miracle. It blows your mind.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I'm just feeling these scratches on my table just to see like the you're right, you know, they're like really tiny little scratches. You can actually feel them with your fingertips.
Yeah, and we might not be able to count the scratches, but we can tell between two different surfaces how they feel and that one's different than the other because of sub-microscopic texture differences. So a house and a car on the Earth to a giant whose finger was as big as the planet, it would feel different. They'd be like, oh, that's a parking lot. Oh, there's no buildings here. They would be able to tell.
Oh, Buckingham Palace.
This whole Earth is smoother than a pool ball nonsense. Come on, let's grow up. Earth is bumpy. Its bumpiness deserves some credit.
Stop doing that, internet. Okay, well, we've got some bumpiness for you in the second half of this, because boy, have I got an object for you. Michael, can you describe what I am holding in my hand?
It looks like a short twig.
Yes, it does.
A very bumpy, stick-colored stick.
I've got another one here.
Oh, and now you've just pulled up a shorter one. It looks like petrified wood, like a petrified twig, because it's sort of grayish brown and rough. It looks very organic. Again, it's only about as long as a pinky finger, slightly bumpy and gray and brown. It might be hollow.
You are right. It is. It's so I deliberately showed you this side because oh my God, my nails are so bad. We could not put
I was going to say, Hannah, I cannot believe those nails.
You know, I know you're being sarcastic, but you would not believe the amount of criticism that will come my way.
I'm saying it so that they don't. I'm stealing their thunder. Nails? More like snails. I don't know. Does that make sense?
So, right, you are absolutely right that it's about the length of a pinky finger. It's very knobbly. It's brown. It doesn't look very interesting at all. You would walk past this lying on the ground and not notice it at all. But if I turn it round, this might give you a slightly better clue because on the other side, you can see that it's hollow and inside it has this glassy texture.
Oh, like a geode almost.
Almost. And it feels like glass.
Oh, yeah. I can hear you banging it on your table and it sounds like a piece of fine porcelain.
It does indeed. Okay, here is my big reveal. What I am holding in my hand is fossilized lightning.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that cool? So what happens is that lightning, often, millions of years ago, but basically throughout the entire history of the Earth, lightning hits sand. Okay, can you see that one? This one's a bit clearer, I think.
And it turns it to glass.
Yes, because what happens is, if you imagine having a bucket of sand and shining a mega powerful laser in there, then any sand that's touching the laser will just instantly melt into goo. The goo then sort of cools down into this hollow tube of glass, but the very middle of it doesn't just melt, it actually vaporizes. Where the lightning hits the center of this, it will actually vaporize. So you have this hollow tube, this hollow glass tube. And then what happens is that the sort of gas from the vaporized sand expands outwards, creating this basically this glass straw, right? Isn't that cool?
Yeah, okay, right. So it's so hot in the middle, it turns not into a liquid, into a goo, but into a gas.
Yeah.
Glass gas.
Glass gas, exactly. And what is amazing about these things, okay, so Darwin in particular, he was obsessed by these. They're called fulgurites, by the way. They're really cheap. I got these on eBay. They're like 9-10 quid each. There's loads of them. They're not you're not going to find this on a walk in Epping Forest, you got to go to the right part of the world to see a lot of these. But across the world, there's a lot of them because there is a lot of lightning that's happening at any moment in time.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, there is a really brilliant website which is called blitzortung.org, where you can see it's a live map of where lightning is striking across the world. It comes with sounds as well.
So it plays a sound for every lightning strike that occurs on Earth in real time?
In real time, exactly. And there's way more lightning going on than you would imagine. Right now there's a little pocket going on in southern Europe, loads across Australia, a big band, essentially by the equator is where you get lots and lots of it. Almost very rarely get lightning at the poles.
Yeah.
And one of the theories about that, by the way, is that it's cosmic rays that give the sort of potential to, in order to sort of trigger off a lightning strike where you get some potential difference in clouds.
Oh, no kidding. Cosmic rays once again,
those guys.
Particles of mini hats.
Yeah.
So they seed the process required for lightning to happen.
So I think it's the other way around. So there's the sort of main theory is about how within clouds you have ice and you have sort of like sloppy hail, right? Like soft hail that interact with each other, that crash into each other because of the turbulence in clouds. And then they end up separating. They have different charges, but they end up separating because one's lighter than the other. So that's how you get the sort of the potential difference between different layers of the cloud. But there is this idea, this theory that cosmic rays then act as like the seed for that lightning to start, which I really like.
Wow. All right. So why did you pick these up? Just as decoration? Did you use them to teach?
Hey, it's a glass straw, Michael. What's not to like? No, I read about how much Darwin liked them, and I just wanted to see how easy it was to get hold of, because they are really amazing that you would have something, because it's essentially, they're so rough and knobbly on the outside because that's where the sand is, right? The sand is sucked.
Yeah.
But on the inside, I mean, it's a shame that I can't give this to you in person, but they are so smooth and glassy on the inside. It's like, it sort of feels otherworldly. It sort of feels like this is a freak moment that has created this.
Yeah, well, it was a freak moment. It's natural glass. It's accidental glass. Have you ever used one as a straw?
No, I was joking. I should do that. I mean, it's not going to hurt you.
But you should, right? If they're only £9 each.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, how brittle are they? Could you carry it around as a reusable straw?
Should I try and snap it?
Well, yes.
I reckon you could, shall I? For the purposes.
For the purposes of this video, it's worth it.
Ready? Okay, I'm going to try and snap it.
Whoa, that was easy.
Yeah.
That was brittle.
That was. Now I've just either halved the price or doubled it.
Yeah, you may have doubled it.
The thing that's nice about these is that because they've been being created across the whole history of the Earth, what they do is that as that glass sort of melts and then hardens, it traps these little air bubbles inside it. So there's all the way down here, there'll be all these little air bubbles. And that's a sort of like a taste, as it were, of the air at that moment in time whenever the fulgurite happened. So what scientists do is they take these, they work out how odd they are, and they allow them to sort of see what the atmosphere was like in the Sahara Desert, for example, 15,000 years ago, see what kind of plants were there, see what kind of carbon isotopes were in the air. You really sort of get this way to look backwards in time using these little things. It's cool, isn't it?
So by breaking that one, you may have released a few molecules of prehistoric air.
I think this one's quite a new one, to be honest. Smells modern.
Smells Victorian, maybe.
Victorian, exactly. There is this, fulgurite has this quite terrifying cousin, which is called trinitite.
Yes, I was going to say, that is not naturally formed glass. It's glass that humans made by blowing up and testing nuclear weapons.
Exactly. So when the first atomic bomb was detonated in New Mexico, the Trinity test, the heat from that melted the desert sand and it turned it green as well. It's this radioactive glass. That one I did not buy on eBay.
That's harder to get because it doesn't just happen every time there's a lightning storm, or not every time, but you have to test a nuclear weapon around sand, and then you've got some trinitite, which of course is named after the Trinity site where the first atomic full-scale testing occurred. But I think it's probably called trinitite no matter where it forms now.
I think it probably is, yeah. I think it probably is. You've got history of buying radioactive objects just for your own interest. I seem to remember you telling us about some radioactive lead at one point.
Yeah. Well, you can get radioactive lead isotopes just mail order. You could probably get them off of Amazon today. My mom got me some radioactive lead for my bubble chamber when I was a kid. And it was at the tip of a needle inside a little test tube, and she made me keep it in the garage. But we also just bought some autunite, which is a uranium bearing mineral. My colleague, who lives in a different city, acquired a large amount of this mineral. And it came in a lead-lined box with a big warning on it that says stay 5 meters away. So we found a suitable location, and there's like warning labels and stuff, but it's still not really concentrated enough. We want to remove as much of the elements that aren't uranium as possible. Now, we don't quite know how to enrich the uranium.
Yeah.
But I might make some calls.
I would say that's closely guarded state secrets, isn't it? Uranium enrichment.
Yeah, I mean, we've looked into how to enrich uranium, and the old centrifuge process, I don't know how to make a good enough centrifuge. And you've got to, they don't really tell you exactly how to do it. Today, I think they use a lot of lasers. And in the future, I think they'll do nothing. I think that we're developing ways to power nuclear power stations just with uranium ore that doesn't need to be processed and enriched, which is great, which is really great.
Well, I think that's bringing us towards the end of this episode. But you can tune in next week to hear more about Michael's adventures into deeply troubling uranium enrichment, or find out whether he's been smuggled away by the FBI.
No, I feel like maybe I shouldn't have said that because I've ruined the surprise, but not for everybody.
All right, well, we'll be back on Tuesday with hopefully another episode, as long as Michael remains a free man. So catch us then.
I will be in a week. I'll see you guys then.
Welcome to The Rest is Science. I'm Hannah Fry.
And I'm Michael Stevens.
Michael, I want to talk to you about dirty air.
Today we have another special bonus video for you. It'll be a collection of 5 more fan favorite nightmare-inducing stories. And don't worry if you've heard or seen these before, because we have totally re-edited all of them, so the viewing experience will be all new. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and reverse all their toilet paper rolls, so instead of feeding out from the top, they feed out from underneath like a serial killer. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. In 2004, Mitch was in his final semester at a college in Louisiana when he met another senior, a wonderful young lady named Kayla. From the instant he saw her, he knew he was in love. She played hard to get at first, but after several months, he won her over. After graduation, the pair stayed in Louisiana and moved in together while they got their careers off the ground. 2 years later, the pair got married, and almost immediately, Kayla got pregnant. At the time, Mitch's career was really starting to take off, which allowed Kayla to stay at home and take some time off. By the time their daughter was born, Mitch was making so much money that Kayla decided to just stay home and be a full-time mom. A couple years later, Kayla got pregnant again, and by the time their daughter was 2 years old, they had their son. Mitch adored his children. Every morning before he went to work, he would sneak into their room and he would watch them sleep, and then in the evenings, they would have these big family sit-down meals and then play games together until bedtime. Mitch's life was perfect. Shortly after his son's birth, Mitch was lounging on the couch in his TV room when he noticed out of the corner of his eye the red lamp in the corner of the room. It just looked funny. It was almost like the light itself was blurry, but when he looked a little bit closer at it, the entire lamp looked blurry. And so Mitch looked around the room and nothing else was blurry. He rubbed his eyes and looked back over at this lamp and it was still blurry. He turned the TV off and walked over to the lamp, and even though he was right in front of it, the lamp was still blurry. And Mitch didn't have bad eyesight, and so he's thinking, is there something wrong with me? Am I having a stroke? Do I have an aneurysm? Is there some sort of illness here that's making me see this lamp blurry when it's really not? But Mitch told himself he was healthy and that whatever this was, it was an anomaly and nothing to worry about. And so he went back over to the couch, turned the TV back on, and tried to ignore the lamp. But as he was watching TV, out of his peripheral vision, he couldn't help but notice this weird blurry lamp. And so finally, he turned the TV off again, and he turned to look at this lamp. And now, in addition to being blurry, it appeared to be upside down. Now Mitch was genuinely concerned that there was something wrong with him, because again, nothing else in the entire room was blurry or upside down. It was just this lamp. And so a few minutes later, his wife and his kids came home, and Mitch decided he would not tell them about this lamp. He didn't want to alarm them. He figures he will get to the bottom of this blurry lamp, and then he will tell his wife and kids. And so that night, the family has a sit-down meal, and then afterwards they play some games together, and then everybody goes upstairs and goes to sleep. But after everyone had gone to sleep, Mitch was just laying in bed thinking about this lamp. And so finally, he snuck out of his bed and went downstairs to the TV room, and he sat on the couch and he just stared at this lamp. And for hours and hours, he just fixated himself on this lamp, watching it kind of morph around and turn upside down and get blurrier and blurrier by the second. The next day, Kayla found Mitch lying on the couch, passed out, and she asked him if he was okay. And again, Mitch didn't tell her about this lamp that was still blurry. He just told her that he wasn't feeling well and he was not going to go to work that day. But Mitch didn't go to work for 3 more days. He just sat on the couch and stared at this lamp. And Kayla obviously picked up on this strange behavior and kept poking and prodding to get more information about what was going on. But Mitch never told her the truth about this lamp. He just kept telling her he felt sick. She urged him to go see a doctor, but Mitch told her it would be fine, he'd get better. And then over time, as this lamp continued to morph and get bigger and get stranger and stranger, Mitch suddenly was unable to respond to his wife. He became totally unresponsive. And so obviously his wife became desperate and called the doctor. And as she's on the phone with the doctor trying to get advice about what to do, Mitch realizes the lamp is now growing in leaps and bounds. And before long, the lamp is the entire size of the room, and all he can see is the red color of this lamp. And then Mitch starts to hear these voices, these screams coming from somewhere in the distance, and then he feels this blinding pain in his head. And then he opens his eyes and he looks up and he sees he's laying on the sidewalk next to one of the buildings at his college in Louisiana. And surrounding him is this crowd of people with wide eyes that are staring at him. Mitch had no idea what was going on, and so he naturally just began scanning the crowd, looking for Kayla and his kids to try to figure out, how he got here. But before he could ask any questions and before he could find his wife and kids, a police officer ran through the crowd, picked him up and ran him over to his police car, put him in the back, and then began driving away. And so while Mitch is in the back of this police car, he turns to the officer and he says, "What's going on?" And the officer would tell him he was attacked by a huge college football player. He got hit in the head and he fell backwards and he hit his head again and he fell unconscious. Mitch asked the officer where his wife and kids were, and the cop said he had no idea. And that's when it clicked for Mitch. The lamp wasn't real. Neither was his wife, neither was his daughter, neither was his son, neither was his life. For the past 10 years, it was all a hallucination while he was unconscious after getting attacked. Mitch was brought to the hospital where he would make a full physical recovery, but after being released, he was horribly depressed, and he had to get intense therapy to basically grieve for the loss of his family that never existed. These days, Mitch says he can barely remember what his family even looked like, but periodically in his dreams, he will catch a glimpse of his son in his peripheral vision, and his son is perpetually 5 years old, and he's trying to talk to his father, but Mitch can never understand what he says. In 2006, a 20-year-old woman named Sarah started having some very strange dreams about a woman named Aurora. She had a very striking face with sharp features, and long black hair. Now, her dreams varied. Sometimes Sarah was in a crowd of people, or she was at her office, or she was just alone in a room. But in all of her dreams, Aurora would always show up. Either she would interact with Aurora and they would speak, but Sarah could never remember what they actually spoke about, or Aurora would just be in the crowd or in the background just watching Sarah. Now, she had these dreams enough that eventually Sarah began to think, I must know someone named Aurora. I must have come across this person, and now they're just kind of manifesting in my brain at night when I'm sleeping. And so she began going through her older posts on social media to look in pictures of her and of her friends to see if there was a woman with striking features and long black hair that was this Aurora person in her dream. But after looking through hundreds and hundreds of pictures, she couldn't find any indication that she had met this person, at least not according to her social media. And so Sarah began just going on Google and typing in Aurora, long black hair, striking features. Has anybody dreamed about this? To see if there were people talking about having this type of dream on the internet. But she had no luck. Eventually, after about 3 or 4 months of having these strange dreams that Aurora was in, Aurora stopped showing up in Sarah's dreams. It was like it suddenly was all over. And so very quickly, Sarah just kind of forgot about it. A few years later, on Halloween night 2009, Sarah and a friend pulled off the highway into a gas station. They had been out with some friends celebrating Halloween, and now they were making their way back home. Sarah pulled into an empty spot right in front of the convenience store, and after they were parked, Sarah and her friend got out, they went inside, they got some snacks and drinks, and then they came back outside and climbed back into Sarah's car. A few moments later, Sarah had turned her car on, she had backed out, and she had driven past all of the gas station pumps, and she was making her way towards the single-lane strip of road that merged out onto the highway. It was how anybody who got into this gas station got back out onto the highway. And so as she's getting closer to the entrance of this short merge road, her phone suddenly rings. What happens next occurred over a span of just a few seconds. So it might seem like this is over several minutes, but this all happened pretty much simultaneously. So she's pulling up to the entrance of this merge road, her cell phone rings, and because there was no one behind her, it was not a busy night, Sarah decides to just stop her car, put it in park so she can safely take this phone call. And so she stops her car pretty much right in front of the entrance to this merge road, and she picks up her phone, she looks at the number, and she doesn't recognize it, but she picks it up anyways, and she says, hello. There was silence on her phone, and as Sarah is saying, hello, is anybody there? Another car from the gas station pulls up right behind Sarah's car, and they start honking their horn immediately. They're in a huge rush. And so Sarah, who's totally embarrassed that she's blocking traffic, she hangs up the phone, she puts it down, she puts her car back in drive, and she hits the gas. But this driver behind her is apparently in such a rush, they're so impatient, that they actually swerved around her, driving on the dirt off to the side of the road just to get around her, and then they sped off down the merge road back onto the highway. And literally, seconds later, another car that was already on the highway, a silver Honda Civic, lost control and smashed into this car that had just passed Sarah's car. So there's this huge car accident, literally right in front of Sarah and her friend, who have now stopped the car. They're right at the end of the merge road looking at this horrible accident that they narrowly escaped. Sarah put her car back in park, she picked up her phone, and she called the police. When the police showed up a few moments later, they took down Sarah and her friend's version of events, and then a little while later, after the ambulances had left and after the 2 cars had been pulled off of the highway, one of the police officers pulled Sarah aside and told her that the driver of the Honda Civic and the driver of the car that had swerved around her had both been killed in the accident. Shocked, the only thing Sarah could think to do was to call back that number she didn't recognize that had effectively stopped her from getting onto the highway and maybe even stopped her from being hit by that Honda Civic. And so she wanted to talk to this person and thank them for saving her life. But when she called the number back, the person did not pick up. However, it went to her voicemail, and it said, "Hi, you've reached Aurora. Leave your name and number after the beep." Sarah could not believe it. She said she had never felt goosebumps like that in her entire life. The next day, Sarah tried calling the number again, and this time the woman, Aurora, answered the phone. The two got to talking, and Sarah explained her crazy dreams and now this crazy car crash thing and how it's all connected. And Aurora would tell Sarah, like, that's amazing. This is a crazy story you're telling me, except I didn't call you last night. I have no idea how you got my phone number. And so at the end of this phone call, the two women really had not reached any sort of explanation for how this came to be, how they came to be talking. But they ultimately just said, okay, hey, thanks and best of luck to you. And then they hung up. After the call was over, Sarah found herself just kind of sitting there, not really sure how to react to what had just happened. It was such a totally bizarre thing that she had just been through over the past 24 hours. And then if you include the dream, this has been a multi-year long thing. And so on a whim, Sarah just opens up her Facebook account and she plugs in Aurora's full name because Aurora had given her full name on this phone call they had just had. And when she looked at her phone, when the results came in, Sarah nearly fainted. Right at the top of the results page was this woman, Aurora's Facebook account. And her profile picture showed her face. And when Sarah looked at her face, it was the exact same face she had seen so many times in her dreams. It was the same Aurora with the striking features and long black hair. The woman in her dreams was the woman who called her and saved her life. In 2006, 73-year-old Sherman Sizemore was the definition of a man's man. He had spent the bulk of his adult life doing one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, mining for coal in West Virginia. And while he was a coal miner, he apparently had lost track of the amount of times he had nearly been killed from mine shaft collapse and gas leaks. Later on in life, after his kids had all grown up, he had retired from coal mining and become an ordained Baptist minister, and despite his harrowing backstory and burly, intimidating appearance, he was known to be incredibly gentle and very calming to his parishioners. He was also known to be an incredibly devoted grandfather, to the point where if there was a chance to spend time with his grandkids, he would basically throw all of his responsibilities out the window to do that. But in January of that year, something changed in Sherman. He went from being this pillar in the community to being a deranged, paranoid lunatic. It all started on the afternoon of January 19th. Sherman and his wife Ruby were sitting in their home alone on the couch, just kind of doing their own things, when suddenly, out of the blue, Sherman just starts screaming as if he sees something in front of him that's terrifying him, and his scream startled Ruby so that she started screaming, and so she looks at her husband, and he's still just looking straight out ahead. He's terrified of something in front of him, and so Ruby looks from him to where he's looking, and there's nothing there. And so she turns back to her husband and she's like, what's going on? What are you screaming for? What are you so scared of? But Sherman wasn't able to speak. After he stopped screaming, he just continued to look straight out as if whatever had terrified him had him in this trance where he couldn't look away. And so his eyes are wide, his mouth is open, his face is going white, he's starting to sweat, and Ruby's starting to panic. She has no idea what's happening with him. And so eventually she just holds on to him and says, come back to me, come back to me. And Sherman at some point he kind of broke out of his trance, and he looked at his wife and he just says, you can't leave me or they'll kill me. Ruby has never seen behavior like this in her husband ever. This is a completely different person she's interacting with, and so she has no idea what to do. And so instead she just kind of holds on to Sherman and prays that he doesn't start acting like that again. But that didn't happen. All day long, periodically, he would just start screaming about something that Ruby couldn't see. Now, Ruby did consider calling 911 and getting medics out there, but his behavior was so unusual, and he was normally such a rock who was so competent, who was so healthy, that she didn't want to. She felt like he would just kind of get through this, that if they can just get through today and get into tomorrow, that he would be better. And so she just all day was comforting him and just dealing with these episodes. And then finally they got into bed that night, and Ruby's thinking, thank goodness, we're going to wake up tomorrow and things will be better. But when she woke woke up the next morning, it was very obvious Sherman had not slept at all. He was looking straight up at the ceiling. He looked worse than the day before. It was obvious that he was not back to normal. And so Ruby called the rest of the family and had them come over to figure out what they were going to do. But when Sherman found out his family was coming to his house, he told Ruby they can't come inside. He was afraid they and others were conspiring to bury him alive. The only person he could be around was Ruby, and his whole family had no idea what to do. Little did they know, there was actually a very specific reason he was acting the way he was. A few months before January 19th, which was the day Sherman turned into this different person, a few months earlier, he began complaining of severe abdominal pains. And so he and his wife Ruby and his daughter, they went to the hospital, and the doctor, after examining him and running some tests, determined that most likely his pain was coming from his gallbladder. But the only way to be sure would be to do some exploratory surgery and literally look inside of Sherman's gut and look at his gallbladder and see if that was the problem. And so the doctor asked Sherman, are you prepared to do an exploratory surgery, or would you like to just kind of wait it out and see what happens with this pain? And so Sherman talked it over with his wife and his family, and they made the decision that the pain was just too much, and so they would go forward with the surgery. And so on the morning of January 19th, so again, this is the day that Sherman basically loses his mind, he goes into the hospital completely normal. He goes in with his wife, he goes in with his daughter, and he makes his way over to the surgery wing of the hospital. He says bye to his family, and he's put on a stretcher bed, and he's wheeled in and prepped for surgery, and then brought into the operating room. And while he was in the operating room, laying on his stretcher bed flat on his back, looking straight up at all these bright lights above him, he just struck up some chit-chat with the nurses and doctors who were in the room prepping the room for surgery, and they were also putting the IV into his arm. Then at some point, one of the nurses lowered the oxygen mask onto Sherman's face so the anesthesiologist could administer the 2-drug cocktail that would knock him out for the surgery. Sherman was scheduled to get something known as general anesthesia for this operation, where basically he would be completely out, he wouldn't feel anything, they'd do the surgery, and then he would wake up in recovery. And so once this mask was on Sherman's face, the anesthesiologist began pumping him full of the drugs that would make him be knocked out for the surgery. However, the anesthesiologist only administered one of the 2 drugs necessary for general anesthesia. He administered the paralyzing drug, but he did not administer the actual anesthetic that would knock him out, and most importantly, would get rid of all of his pain. And so as this mask is on his face and Sherman believes he's being given the proper dosage of drugs, the nurse who was nearby told Sherman to go ahead and start counting backwards in his head from 10, knowing full well that Sherman would pass out before he reached 0. And Sherman knew this too. He had been in surgery before, and so he happily began counting in his head. 10, 9, 8, he started to feel something. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Boom, he was out. Except he wasn't. When he reached 0 in his head, counting down, he realized he had not passed out. He began taking mental stock of what was going on, and he realized he could completely feel his body, but when he tried to move his body, he couldn't. He was completely paralyzed. When he tried to make a sound, he couldn't, because his vocal cords were also paralyzed. The only thing he could move were his eyes. He could move them left and right. However, they had taped his eyes shut, so he can't see anything. And so Sherman is thinking to himself, okay, I've been given the drugs, maybe they're slow acting, any minute now I'm gonna drift off to sleep and this will just be a distant memory. But after a few seconds, he's hearing the doctors and nurses in the room. He can't see them, but he hears them. They seem to be moving towards doing this operation, and he's still awake. And so Sherman becomes frantic and starts flicking his eyes left and right as fast as he possibly can, and the rapid eye movement actually loosened the tape on both of his eyelids, and it created a tiny slit that he could actually look through. And what he saw terrified him. The surgeon was walking over next to him. He was getting his gloves on, and then the surgeon says, "Scalpel." And the nurse hands him this chrome metallic blade, and the surgeon takes the blade and begins cutting into Sherman's midsection. Sherman felt
everything. But Sherman couldn't do anything about it. All he could do was rapidly flick his eyes left and right in hopes one of them would see that he was awake, that he was feeling this. But no one was paying attention to his face, so they didn't see his eyes moving around. And so the surgeon continued to cut into his midsection until he had cut out a fairly significantly sized hole, at which point the surgeon hands the scalpel to the nurse and says, "Clamps," at which point the nurse hands him what looks like a torture device, and the surgeon proceeds to use these clamps to pin segments of Sherman's skin that has just been cut open to his body to basically keep the hole open. And then the surgeon began tugging on the outsides of this hole in Sherman's midsection, making sure it was big enough that he could actually get a good look into his body. And every little tug is sending lightning bolts of pain into Sherman's body. But again, all he can do is flick his eyes left and right, and no one's paying attention. Scope, the surgeon called out for, and the nurse handed him a camera that he jammed into Sherman's gut. And then the surgeon said, "Suction," and the nurse got what looked like a vacuum and pressed it inside of this open wound and began sucking out fluids from his body. The pain Sherman was experiencing is unimaginable. Every second felt like an eternity. Forceps, the surgeon called, and the nurse handed him these metal prongs that he put inside of this hole in Sherman's body, and he used them to dislodge his gallbladder so he could get a better look at it. By this point, Sherman wanted to die. He was no longer flicking his eyes left and right. He was just looking straight out, hoping someone would finally see him. And someone did. One of the nurses standing next to the surgeon looked up at Sherman's face and saw Sherman looking back, terrified at the nurse, at which point the nurse yelled out, "Stop, he's awake, he's awake!" And the surgeon practically faints, and he looks over at the anesthesiologist and he calls him, "Get over here and fix this." And so the anesthesiologist comes running over from the side of the room. He gets up next to Sherman and begins pumping him full of painkillers. And as he's doing this, he has this moment of clarity. He remembers he didn't give him the anesthetic. And so as these new painkillers that have just been introduced begin to take their effect, Sherman's eyes go from being terrified to glazed over, and he does pass off to sleep. And so now he's out and he can't feel anything. But now the anesthesiologist and the medical team realize they have a very big problem. This patient just experienced 16 minutes of surgery and felt all of it. And at the end of it, when he wakes up, he's going to remember it, and he's probably going to file a lawsuit against the hospital. And so a decision was made. It's unclear if the anesthesiologist acted alone or if the entire team was in on this. But regardless, the anesthesiologist administered an additional drug after giving all these painkillers. This additional drug was called midazolam, but it's better known as the amnesia drug. And like its nickname implies, anyone who gets it will forget what has just happened to them. And so the idea was, by giving him this amnesia drug, he won't remember the trauma he had suffered through during the surgery, and so wouldn't file a lawsuit. And so after he was given this drug, the medical team, they went back to doing the surgery, they completed it, and they got him back out to recovery. And then when Sherman woke up in recovery, he did not remember what had happened to him inside of the operating room, at least not consciously. Those horrible 16 minutes had been implanted on Sherman's subconscious. Basically, his body recognized that he had experienced extreme trauma. However, the amnesia drug wiped away the memory of how he received that trauma. So there's this big disconnect in his memory. And so when Sherman came to in the recovery room, he immediately sensed something was horribly, horribly wrong. He was scared, he was anxious, he had this incredible sense of dread, but he had no memory to tie these feelings to. And so as Sherman is sitting in recovery, he must have tried to kind of hide the way he was feeling because he didn't even remotely understand it. He had been completely happy and normal going into the surgery, and now a couple of hours later, he's a complete mess. And so he leaves the hospital that day on January 19th. He goes back to his house and he sits on the couch with his wife, and as he's sitting there, suddenly these horrible feelings he's having, they become too much, and he basically has a panic attack, and he starts screaming out, and he's terrified of something, but he doesn't know what it is. And then, over the next couple of days, he began having these flashbacks where he would access the actual 16 minutes of torture he went through, but when he would see someone cutting into him and opening his chest up and sucking things out of it, he didn't think that happened to me, and that's why.
Now it's time to get serious about those river lock repairs. We're going to need a mountain of concrete, that's for sure. Take a drive to the concrete plant and see what shape it's in. And you can also set up a direct route from the countryside base so our engineer crew can get there. And fill any major potholes on the way if you need to. They're engineers, not test drivers.
Why I feel this way. Instead, he thought it was just this horrible nightmare that he couldn't escape from. And
chilling tales for dark nights.
The Swing. Written by Dan David. Narrated by Jeff Clement. What do people usually fear when moving out to live on their own? What sort of problems does one normally encounter when finally venturing from the safety of their parents' home into a place of their own? Perhaps it's paying their rent on time, or having to do all the cleaning without any of Mommy's help. These were the things I anticipated. I never could have predicted the events of the past week. We had finally moved the last box into my new house. Single-level ranch and only 2 bedrooms, but for a bachelor like me, it was a dream come true. The house was right in the heart of a great suburban neighborhood with a 2-car driveway and a pretty big backyard. When I had seen the yard, the first thing I thought of was all the parties I'd be hosting. I stepped onto the deck and took a breath of fresh air while closing my eyes to imagine the endless nights of friends, booze, and of course, women. I stretched my arms out and let out an exuberant sigh of relief. As I scanned my surroundings, I couldn't help but notice the elevated deck gave me the proper vantage point to see into my neighbors' backyards. I figured since I hadn't formally met any of them yet, I would try and guess now whom I'd have to worry about if my parties got too rowdy and the risk of 911 calls would become a harsh reality. To my right, I saw a vibrant garden, a grill, and a hammock. I figured it was a middle-aged couple. Hopefully they're not too old and cranky, I thought to myself as I turned my head to view my neighbors to the left. And that's when I saw him. Under a large oak tree, adorned in colorful Christmas lights, was what looked to be a young boy swinging away on his playset. Great, I thought. I bet his bedtime is a lot earlier than any party I throw would be ending. I continued to look at the boy. His back was turned to me. He wore a hoodie and gloves, which struck me as odd since it was summer and pretty warm outside. I brushed it off and assumed the boy was sick. I went back inside and began to unpack everything. With the help of some friends, we managed to put together all my furniture, hook up my home entertainment system, and more or less get the house in working order. I just sent out the text, guys. Get ready to party tonight, I exclaimed as I leaped off the couch and finished my beer. The guys all began to cheer, and a round of high fives were exchanged. By now, the sun was setting, as it had been several hours since we had first brought in all my belongings. My friend Dan was unpacking one of the last boxes as he eagerly looked out of the window.
Have you met your neighbors yet? Any fine young ladies gonna be coming around here asking to borrow some sugar? He asked in a sarcastic tone as he turned to me with a lewd gesture. Smiling and walking over, I replied, "No, not yet, but I don't think I'll have much luck in that department. From the looks of it, it's just a bunch of normal families. One of them even has a kid." As I pointed to the house I had seen earlier, my face scrunched to show a look of confusion and surprise. The boy I had seen swinging earlier was still there. He was still swinging under the ambience of the lit-up tree. Weird. That kid was swinging when we first got here, too, I said to Dan as he looked at his phone. Barely acknowledging my comment, he raised his hand up and mumbled, "Must be special ed kid or something." He walked off, calling more people to invite them to the housewarming party. I turned back to the swinging boy. He couldn't have been swinging this whole time, could he? That night, as planned, we had my housewarming party. It was such a great time. I greeted my friends and cousins as they arrived, handing them all the beverage of their choice. We were outside until around 3 or 4 in the morning when the weather suddenly got cool and it began to drizzle. I would have been willing to stick it out until it passed, but the girls all began to freak out, claiming their hair would frizz, and they all ran inside. Naturally, the guys followed, holding makeshift umbrellas over the girls' heads. I laughed to myself at how hard they were trying to get lucky. I took the opportunity to quickly clean up some of the trash that had accumulated before going inside. I scooped up a bunch of cans and bottles before I turned around and was left in awe. I guess we were all distracted by the music and alcohol to notice earlier, but now, with everyone inside, I saw it. The boy was still outside and on his swing. He was still in the same position and outfit I'd seen him in all day, back turned to me, wearing the same hoodie and gloves. I stood there for a minute, lost in thought, when from behind me I heard a loud, "Hiya, neighbor." I jumped and did a quick 180, dropping the trash I'd been carrying. "Oh, sorry about that, bud. Didn't mean to startle ya," laughed an elderly man. He was wearing pajamas and slippers as he held his hand out, waiting for a shake on my end. "Oh, hello, sir," I said as I cleared my throat and shook his hand, collecting my thoughts. He smiled and began to fumble with his hands.
I hate to be that guy, especially since, you just moved in and everything, but you think you guys can turn down the music a bit? My wife and I are pretty light sleepers, and at this age, we tend to be early risers, he said bashfully. I smiled and laughed as I put my hand to my face in embarrassment. Geez, I'm sorry, sir. I guess things got a little crazier than planned. I didn't think people would stick around this long. I really did feel bad. I half expected the man to come out yelling, demanding us to keep it down lest he called the cops. His gentle demeanor was refreshing, and I was more than happy to oblige. I laughed and replied, I'll go let everyone know that they need to stay inside and take it down a notch. I'm Peter, by the way. I shook his hand. Pleasure to meet you, Peter. I'm Paul, he said, with a grin. As he smiled, his eyes drifted past mine and towards the swinging boy. I assume you've noticed the Langers kid by now, huh? Asked Paul as he cupped his hands and breathed into them to try to keep warm. Yeah, I said as I turned to face him. What's the deal with him? He's been on that thing all day. Paul shrugged. Not sure. No one really knows the story. He just swings and swings until eventually. Paul stopped and his eyes widened. Wait, it's happening. Check it out. I turned around to find the boy had stopped swinging. He sat completely still for a moment before slowly rising from the rubber seat of the swing. He began to shake violently, falling to his knees and scraping the dirt below him. Even from where we were standing, we were able to hear his quick bursts of shrieking and gurgling. I became concerned. Was the boy okay? It looked like he was having an asthma attack or a seizure. I started to run to the boy in order to help, but stopped after a couple of steps. His mother had run out. I looked at her, completely sober now from the adrenaline that was pumping through my body. It was not a pleasant sight. She was a frail, haggard woman with a gray, knotted mane of hair on her head. Her skin was pale and her eyes had dark bags underneath. It looked as if she hadn't slept or had a proper meal for ages. Mrs. Langer rushed out quick, holding a small, orange bottle, the kind one would receive from a pharmacist. After she reached her boy, she knelt down and poured several white pills into her hand. Before she could even finish offering the pills to her son, he had grabbed her arm and buried his face into the palm of her hand, inhaling the pills. Mrs. Langer pulled away and began to rub her wrist. It appeared the boy had hurt her, which did not really surprise me due to how skinny the woman was. Paul and I watched intensely without uttering a single word. After a moment or two, the boy simply rose back to his feet, sat back down on his swing, and resumed his leisurely activity. Mrs. Langer grabbed the now empty orange bottle and proceeded back inside, still clutching her wrist. Paul and I were both shaken up. We had no idea what we had just seen. Wow, I've seen the boys spaz out before, but never that bad. I bet whatever condition he has is getting more severe. Poor kid, Paul said as he rubbed the back of his head. What? What exactly is wrong with him? I asked, with my eyes still glued to the child. Like I said, I don't know. No one around here does, Paul replied, turning around and walking back to his door. Anyway, my wife is probably getting worried. You have a good night, Peter. Yeah, I sighed, arranging my thoughts. Nice meeting you, Paul. We both exchanged a final wave and returned to our respective households. The party was dying down when I entered, and I was glad. What I had just seen took a lot out of me. The next morning I felt like shit. The copious waves of alcohol I had carelessly consumed the night prior had finally caught up to me. My head throbbed and I was severely parched. I stood up and the arid sensation in my mouth and throat was quickly replaced by feelings of nausea. I scrambled to the bathroom and dropped to my knees, clutching the porcelain for dear life. Oh, at least I have the day off to recover, I thought to myself. I grabbed the sports drink I had strategically placed in the bathroom the day before in anticipation for my hangover and chugged it down in only a few gulps. I was no stranger to this feeling, and I knew what to expect. Within a couple of minutes, I began to vomit and immediately felt better, though not enough to have a very productive day. I mentally prepared myself for a day of movies, video games, and junk food. After a couple of hours of lying in my borderline vegetative state, I heard the mailman make his stop at my door. In no mood to get off the couch, I ignored it and continued binge-watching the zombie show everybody was raving about. It was probably not the best idea to be observing such grotesque gore while it felt as if a war was being waged in my stomach. I sucked it up and continued to watch. Several episodes later, I made my way to the kitchen and popped in a giant TV dinner into the microwave. While it cooked, I decided I would bring in the mail from earlier. I unlocked the front door and let in some much-needed fresh air. I stood at the door and scooped up the contents of my mailbox, sifting through the junk mail and the bills when I saw I'd received a package. Without scanning the box for more details, I brought the small box inside and cut off the tape. I opened it only to find a small orange bottle, like the one I'd seen my neighbor holding last night. I was puzzled and searched for the mailing label on the box. The mailman had delivered it to the wrong house. Annoyed, I let out a big sigh. I was not in the mood to get dressed and leave the house for anything, let alone awkwardly meet new neighbors in order to tell them I have the pills for their weirdo son. I looked out of my back window and saw the boy was swinging away as usual. I heard my microwave go off, indicating my food was ready. With one last glance at the child, I told myself the pills can wait, as the boy had scarfed down several the night before. I tossed the bottle of pills aside and made my way to the kitchen. After eating, I felt fatigued, which caused me to fall asleep on the couch. I woke up from my sleep to the sound of commotion outside my home. The repetitive beeping of a large vehicle in reverse echoed through my brain. Nightfall had arrived, and my house was engulfed in almost absolute darkness. The only light I could see was a dull gray from my now idle television, and the swirl of red and blue illuminating through my windows. The scene that I awoke to was almost surreal, and I thought for a moment that I was dreaming. I got on my feet and I looked through my front window. A crowd had gathered on my front lawn. They were facing the ambulance that was parked in the driveway of the Langer house. I threw on a light coat to hide my stained, most likely rancid-smelling shirt I had been stewing in all day. In the crowd, Paul stood amongst several other people who I presumed to be residents of the neighborhood. "Hey, Paul," I blurted as I cleared the phlegm from my throat. "What the hell is going on?" With his eyes still glued to the scene that unfolded next door, he replied, "Well, we're not exactly sure. We think something may have happened to someone in the house. Mr. Langer is speaking with one of the paramedics and he looks panicked." I saw the man Paul was referring to. Like his wife, Mr. Langer also looked as if his body was depleted and barren. He wore a loose tank top that showed just how skinny he was. His ribs poked through the pale, tight skin on his torso. He was pacing around frantically, covering his eyes and mumbling something to himself. I was still gazing at the distraught man when the soft murmuring of the crowd around me erupted into a frenzy of screams and cries. I turned to the door of the Langer house, and dread began to fill my body. 2 policemen exited the house, followed by a paramedic who wheeled out a gurney. Atop of the gurney was the bloodied body of the seemingly lifeless Mrs. Langer. From where we were standing, we were able to see the pale, bruised wrist of the poor woman hanging from the side, blood running down and dripping from her fingertips. It began to twitch and her head bobbed around as the paramedic pressed an oxygen mask to her face and hoisted the gurney into the back of the ambulance. I turned to Paul, who was standing on the tip of his feet in order to see over the crowd. One of the policemen made his way over to our now frantic group of screaming men and women, ordering us to disperse and return to our homes. Everyone began to bombard the officer with questions, asking what happened and if they were safe.
You have nothing to worry about, people. It appears a group of coyotes attacked Mrs. Langer in her backyard. We've since located and neutralized the animals,
remarked the officer, avoiding eye contact with anyone before him. It was clear he was lying through his teeth. I raised my hand and shouted above the crowd, "And what about the boy? Was he hurt?" The officer shot me a look of irritation and cleared his throat as he hesitantly announced,
He was not anywhere near the scene of the attack. We assume he got scared and ran away for safety, and we're in the process of looking for the child. If anyone sees him, please call 911 immediately.
With that, the officer turned his back to the less than satisfied crowd and almost ran back to his cruiser. I turned to Paul, who bared a look of dismay. He turned and shot an apathetic smile before patting me on the back and making his way inside. I stood there for a moment after the crowd slowly disbanded. Was this my fault? Did it have something to do with the pills? I quickly disregarded the paranoid thoughts that plagued my mind and walked back to my home. I slid through the front door that I had carelessly left ajar and shut it behind me as I slid down and cupped my hands around my head. There was a legion of emotions coursing through me as I pondered my next move. I knew I had to get the pills out of my house. Though the chances were slim, I did not want any blame being directed at me for not returning the pills sooner. Hell, I knew I had committed at least one federal crime when I unknowingly opened somebody else's mail. I decided I would anonymously place the box of pills in the Langer's mailbox and dash back inside. I grabbed the pills from my couch and glanced out of the back window. The Christmas lights in the oak tree were as bright as ever, illuminating the grisly crime scene that lay just below. Blood and ripped clothing veiled the ground. That's when I saw them. The boy's gloves and hoodie were lying amongst the carnage. My heart sank. I was sure the boy was dead, or at the very least, critically injured. Tears began to fill my eyes as I banged my fists on the windowsill. The sudden burst of sound emanated throughout my home. I hadn't made a peep since I entered. The sudden contrast in sound made the shameful silence that followed even more noticeable. In the midst of the grim silence, I heard it. The low, spine-tingling gurgle that flowed from my bedroom. I froze, barely breathing. I listened keenly for another sound. To my dismay, I heard it again. Another disgusting gurgle, now louder and fiercer, almost like a growl. The lights in my home were still all off, aside from the weak aura that radiated from the idle television. I was frozen still. My body rebelled against my mind's desire to move. Instinct began to kick in as my eyes adjusted to the darkness and fight or flight became a quick reality. I did not know what was in my house. All I knew was I was definitely going to choose flight. I pulled out my phone and fumbled for the flashlight app as I took a step towards my back door. My eyes were glued to the short hallway that connected the main area of the house to my bedroom. And that's when I saw it. A small creature began to crawl from the hallway. I could barely make out any of its features. It looked human, but on all fours. The way it moved was eerie and awkward. The appendages moved sloppily and its head was to the ground. I heard the same terrifying gurgle from the creature and realized it was sniffing the floor. And what happened next still fills me with dread when I look back. The flashlight app I had opened had finished loading up and powered on through the phone. The bright light pierced the darkness and lit up the monstrous figure. I felt sick. Do you ever get the feeling in the middle of a nightmare where you start to suspect you aren't in reality and you're begging yourself to wake up? That desperate feeling of despair coursed through every fiber of my being. In front of me stood the Langer boy. Without all the layers of clothing he usually wore, I was able to see him for what he really was. This was not a normal child. His skin was tattered and worn out. Wrinkles and scars embellished his body. He slowly raised his head to the source of the light. Our eyes met. His eyes were the worst part. However intense the darkness around his mother's eyes were, they could not compete with the boy's. The black around his peepers only worked to showcase his dilated pupils and the unnatural color of the irises. I might as well have been made of stone. All my ability to move had completely ceased. I could only stand there and watch the situation unfold before me. The boy slowly turned his body in my direction and began to take steps closer and closer. He left bloody prints where his hands met with the wood grain of my floor. It was not long until he was less than a foot from me. For what seemed like an eternity, he did not move. Neither of us did. My mind was warped in panic, and I thought I would pass out. Before I had the chance, the boy rose from his animal-like posture. He was now standing on his feet, arms dangling to his sides. His eyes peered into mine. I stared back, still paralyzed with fear. He began to sluggishly turn his focus from my eyes to my hand, the one that still clutched a bottle of the pills. As soon as he realized what I held, he broke the silence and let out a demonic shriek like that of a banshee. Only his mouth moved as his jaw dropped. This awoke me from my trance and I fell down, still facing the boy. He crouched so that his face met mine. His mouth was still agape, exposing his sharp, mangled teeth. The tiny razor still contained small shreds of what I assumed to be his mother's flesh. He stretched his arm toward me and unraveled his blood-stained hand. Instantly, I knew what he was after.
You
My voice trembled. You want your pills, right? He continued to stare at me, unwavered by my question. I lifted up my hand and began to open the small orange bottle. With shaking hands, I poured several pills into the palm of the child. I waited for a minute.
Feel like something different? I have a request from a bunch of scientists. Sounds like they're on the lookout for things to dig up. They want you to check out a few areas where some relics of the past could be hidden. Nothing wrong with helping out science for a quick change of pace, I guess.
The devil, and what can that secret evil rituals, pentagrams, sacrifices, blood, and demons. These are some of the things that we find associated with Satanism in pop culture. We find it in episodes of The X-Files, in movies like Paranormal Activity or in Rosemary's Baby, and of course in the imagery of metal music. But what is Satanism really? Is there such a thing in reality? And if so, does it look anything like what we see in the movies? What is the history of Satanism and the devil, and what can that teach us about religion, secularism, and other movements in the modern and contemporary world? These are some of the questions that we will explore as we dive into the occult world of Satanism. In the 1980s and 90s, there were many accounts and controversies surrounding supposed satanic rituals in the woods, and a great concern among many people about these satanic themes in some popular and underground music. This phenomenon became known as the Satanic Panic, where fear surrounding this topic was at an all-time high, a phenomenon that still affects culture to a major degree today. There were many claims of satanic rituals being performed in the woods, of people being murdered by satanic cults, and music included subliminal messages leading to these kinds of actions. This was the claim, at least. As a result, a lot of people were actually put on trial or accused of things that in the end turned out to be entirely unsubstantiated, which still had major negative effects on their lives and those around them. But this was nothing new. Any reading of Christian history will reveal that anxieties and claims of Satanism have popped up from time to time, almost always as a way for the church to label heretics, and almost always being completely unsupported and false. So claims of people being Satanists, always determined by those outside the group in question, have existed for a large part of history. The whole history of Satan as the epitome of evil, a spiritual being that opposes God, terrorizes human beings with his demons, and lures them into sin, is one that develops primarily in early Christianity. The word Satan is Semitic or Hebrew in origin, and we can find it in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. It means something like opposer, adversary, or accuser, and it shows up perhaps most prominently in the book of Job, where a Satan is the one that doubts Job's true devotion and tells God to send him trouble as a test. Now, there is no reason to think that Satan is used here as a name for this character, however, but functions primarily as a more literal designation of an adversary to God. In fact, putting aside later Christian interpolations and readings into the Hebrew Bible, there is really no reference at all to any devil or Satan as we know him today in all or any of the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. But by the time of Jesus and the New Testament, things had started to change. The movement known as apocalypticism had had a major impact on the theology and worldview of the Jews, where, for example, there was a much more distinct idea of the perpetual conflict between good and evil, along with teachings about a coming day of judgment. Many have argued that these developments were in part due to influence from the major religion of Zoroastrianism. Regardless, once we get to the New Testament and the Gospels, we find a much more concrete idea of Satan as a kind of personification of evil in the world. He tempts Jesus in the desert in the Gospels, and in the book of Revelation is the leader of the rebellious angels. In the Septuagint, the major Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that most people would have used at this point, the word used to translate ha-Satan, the Hebrew word, into Greek, was diabolos, from which we also eventually get the English devil. As the early Christians formulated and expanded the doctrines of their religion, the character of Satan was expanded upon. He was projected backwards onto the Old Testament. For example, the serpent in the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis was now interpreted to be Satan that had tempted Adam and Eve and led to original sin, according to the Church Father Augustine, for example. Eventually, the devil thus took on the form that we know him as today, and serves as an important, albeit not always prominent, part of Christian theology. Through these developments, the character of Satan also became prominent in Islam. Here the term Satan becomes shaitan, which can be used to refer to the devil, but also to demonic evil forces more generally. Instead, the more personal name of Satan in Islam is Iblis, and he is a similarly important figure in this religion. But like we said, while we do find the character of Satan, at least we can see the development of the character of Satan throughout history, we don't find much in terms of people who actually identify as Satanists or who seem to be Satanists. The only times that we find people being called Satanists is when the church is labeling what they see as heretic groups as being Satanists, using this as a sort of name for the heretics to condemn them. For example, the Cathar movement in southern France in the 12th to 13th centuries was accused of being Satanist. And indeed, Satan did play an important role in their theology. Probably strongly influenced by the dualism of the ancient Gnostics, the Cathars taught that the physical world was actually a prison created by the devil, which needed to be escaped to reach the real God. The world is a battlefield between the forces of good and evil. But clearly, the Cathars did the opposite of worshipping the devil, as he represents the very thing that they aim to turn away from. So to call them Satanists doesn't really work, right? Nonetheless, that's what they were called by some in the Catholic Church. The idea of Satan and his influence on people and society became even more prominent in the early modern period, which we see clearly in the phenomenon known as the witch hunts, which lasted from the 15th to basically the 18th century, where an unspeakable amount of women were tried and executed, suspected of being witches and thereby being in cahoots with the devil. In the Malleus Maleficarum, a central text for the justification and spread of the witch trials, new kinds of diabology and demonology were presented. It bears mentioning that the arguments and worldview presented in the Malleus Maleficarum was usually pretty heterodox and ran counter to the official teachings of the Church, but it still proved quite influential in some circles. Here, the devil becomes more emphasized as a worker of material, physical evil, rather than being an interior inspirer of sin and evil behavior in human beings, which was the way that the devil was conceived before, right? He's the whisperer that leads to humans doing bad things. In the early modern period, through the influence of things like the Malleus Maleficarum, the devil was able to physically create evil in the world in different ways. Witches, according to this text, have made a pact with the devil and worked together with him to do evil in the world. It was even conceived that the witches had, let's call it, naughty relationships with Satan. In the text it says, "The witch has offered herself completely and has bound herself to the devil really and in truth, and not fantastically and in the imagination only. And thus it ought to be understood that she cooperates with the devil in body and in truth, for all works of witches are to this end, whether they always carry out their witchcraft through the pact, or through a glance, or through the spoken word, or through the operation of some instrument of witchcraft deposited under the threshold of a house." In Islam, while this kind of approach hasn't been as common, we do see similar examples. For instance, the Yazidis have been accused of being devil worshippers by some Muslims due to the prominence of the angel called Melek Taus in their religion, which is connected, at least by Muslims, to the devil due to having a similar backstory to Iblis in the Quran. So in short, the category of Satanists and Satanism has, throughout most of history, served simply as a weapon by those wishing to accuse others of being heretics, wishing to condemn others. It is used, it is weaponized, it's a weaponized term in the sense. You call the other Satanist, And we don't find any examples in history of people actually self-identifying as Satanists or that somehow worship the devil, right? There's really no evidence for this. Instead, if we're looking for people who actually do self-identify as Satanists, or at least reinterpret the figure of Satan in a more positive light, as a prominent aspect of their worldview, this doesn't really appear until the 19th century. So in some ways, we might be able to say that Satanism, in that sense, is actually born in the modern period, specifically in the 19th century. In order to find out more about this topic, I spoke with Dr. Per.1, an associate professor at Södertörn University in Stockholm, who's an expert on all things occult and esoteric, including Satanism.
I would say we probably have to go back a century or so to the Romantic period, where you have Romantic poets like Byron and Shelley, who were both politically radical, and they were using the devil as a positive symbol of rebellion against authority, specifically, of course, religious authority, but also absolute monarchy. And in a metaphorical sense, for them, God was the ultimate monarch, in a way. And this, in turn, is something that they picked up from John Milton, from his epic Paradise Lost, where Milton probably didn't quite intend for people to read it the way Romantics did, but in their understanding of Milton's Satan.
Jeez Louise. You know, in this line of work, I've seen things. Heck, I've seen things today, but I never expected this. A concrete plant still in usable condition. Now that's something. Okay, so it has no power right now. But it's still much better than if it had no power and was completely destroyed, right? Now you just need to get a backup transformer from the supply depot to the main power substation. And we got ourselves some concrete. Oh, and patch up the road to the concrete slabs facility. That will get us on the right track.
Satan became the ultimate rebel, a symbol of just rebellion.
And this kind of attitude can only really appear in a post-Enlightenment, increasingly secularizing society. Per.1 and Johan Nilsson wrote, "Naturally, Satanism as an open identity only became possible in a time when Christianity's hold on legal systems and social norms had weakened. In that sense, Satanism is a direct product of secularization, understood primarily as the severing of ties between state/public sphere and religion. It can, on the other hand, also be said to exist in the field of tension between secularity and religiosity, as some forms of it that were geared toward combating Christian influence would be irrelevant in a hypothetical, completely secular society. In some ways, he is the antithesis of the church, the actual opposer of religious dogma. In a time when many were moving away from the strict moralism of Christianity, Satan was the perfect counterpoint to that, a symbol of hedonism and individualism, without any of these thinkers actually worshipping Satan or even believing that he is a real entity. The famous Freemason Albert Pike wrote that, quote, "Satan is not a black god, but the negation of God. The devil is the personification of atheism or idolatry. For the initiates, this is not a person, but a force, created for good, which may serve for evil. It is the instrument of liberty or free will." But around the same time, the figure of Satan also becomes very popular in the emerging movements of occultism and Western esotericism, movements that were increasing in popularity by the second half of the 19th century. Most famously, perhaps, is the Theosophical Society, a movement that sought to find the common perennial esoteric core of all the world's religious and philosophical traditions. The movement's primary founder, Helena Blavatsky, wrote in her works like Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine about Satan, giving entirely new esoteric interpretations of some of the prominent biblical stories. Probably inspired by the ancient Gnostics, Blavatsky interprets the story about the fall in the book of Genesis as a positive one. The serpent, or Satan, by having Eve and Adam eat from the tree of knowledge, actually gives them access to gnosis, true knowledge, and is an important starting point for our initiation into esoteric wisdom. In the dualistic system of the ancient Gnostics, which we covered very briefly before, this interpretation does make sense, since the creator of the physical world and the God described in the Hebrew Bible is the evil, ignorant Yaldabaoth, who has imprisoned us in this world. The serpent here becomes a messenger from the true God, who helps Adam and Eve retain a certain spark of the spiritual, true, divine world. Right, so it turns the story of Genesis completely on its head. Blavatsky's interpretation seems slightly different, but retains the essential message of Satan as a positive, heroic figure that helps humankind. Even so, her understanding of Satan is not an actual external being that exists, but as a kind of allegorical symbol for different aspects of our inner life. She says, Satan, or the red fire dragon, the lord of phosphorus and Lucifer, or light bearer, is in us. It is our mind, our tempter and redeemer, our intelligent liberator and savior from pure animalism. Now, there had been some unique interpretations of Satan in the Islamic world too throughout history, and especially among the Sufis. In Islam, the origin story of Satan is that he, among
the folks at the supply depot, if we get them powered up again, they're willing to spare some supplies. All you need to do is lay the cable and connect them to the grid.
along with the angels, when God creates Adam, the first human being, he asks all the people of heaven, the angels, to bow before Adam. And they all do except for Iblis, right? Satan, the devil. He refuses to bow before Adam because he thinks himself better, basically. He becomes arrogant. And because of this, God punishes him and condemns him, sends him down to become Satan as we know him, right? But to certain Sufi writers like Al-Halaj or Ibn al-Qudat al-Hamadani, there was an interesting twist to this story. They argued that Satan was in fact the most devoted monotheist of all the inhabitants of heaven. He didn't want to prostrate before anyone but God, remaining devoted to God only. He thus becomes almost like a monotheistic hero in these accounts, although they importantly add the detail that he still had a certain arrogance in his devotion, leading him to disobey God, which still resulted in him being cast down. So they're not painting him as an actual good character necessarily, but as I mentioned in my video about Halaj, they add this interesting sort of spicy flavor to the story, where simultaneously he's also the most devoted monotheist because he refuses to bow to Adam. But Blavatsky's arguments are obviously quite different from this, and in some ways even more radical. Her interpretations, as well as the general social and political roles that Satan played, also played a major part in early feminism. This is what Dr. Faxner wrote his PhD dissertation about, which he has studied extensively.
In this book, what I look at is how these ideas that first appeared in Romanticism and socialism soon were picked up by feminists. Feminists who identified Christianity as one of the supporting pillars of patriarchy, where God was the father and his male priests were suppressing women in various ways. And of course it makes sense, if you have that take on things, to look at God's adversary, the devil, as a potential ally. But not only did it make sense like that, it was also, of course, a very drastic, polemical move. So they wanted to provoke people. They wanted to, get people's attention, and in a way, it was effective. On the other hand, and that's sort of the sad end of this story, it wasn't really that well suited for political feminism, for feminists who actually wanted to gain broad support, for example, for women attaining the vote. So this satanic polemic had to be scrapped in the end because it was just too provocative.
Now, as part of this wider movement, the early feminists also reinterpreted certain stories of the Bible in similar ways to the occultists at that time. For instance, they basically adopted the same reinterpretation of the story of the serpent in Genesis as a bringer of freedom and liberation.
So one of the reasons why these feminists picked up on that story in particular would have been that it was being employed at this time by anti-feminists. So for example, male doctors would use it to justify not giving pain relief to women when they were giving birth, due to giving birth in pain being a punishment from God for accepting the forbidden fruit from the devil. And historically, this story had been used to explain why women were more prone to be witches, for example. So it had a long history of very destructive patriarchal use. So it was only natural, I guess, that these feminists would choose that story and turn it on its head. There are other reasons as well. For example, that there was an esoteric influence on this feminist movement from theosophy. And theosophy had this Gnostic strand where they had picked up the notion from ancient Gnosticism that the serpent was in fact a benevolent bringer of gnosis rather than an evil creature.
These thinkers and writings solidified Satan in a completely new way as a symbol for countercultural movements, both political and religious. And this was something that was pretty much unheard of historically, where Satan in Christianity had basically only been associated with evil. Right? He is the representation of the very opposite of good, of God. And all this would pave the way for even more pronounced and self-identified forms of Satanisms to appear in the 20th century. It is with figures like Stanislav Przybyszewski and Ben Kadosh or Carl William Hansen that we see the first examples of people who identified as Satanist or as Luciferian, and who placed a positive or revised view of Satan at the very core of their ideas. This was of course inspired by the developments and writings previously mentioned, but took on a more explicit sort of form here. Przybyszewski presents in his De Synagoge des Satan an almost Gnostic-like dualist worldview, where the evil god, or Satan, is the creator of the material world, as well as the symbol and originator of intellectual thought, freedom, and investigation. The good god is the creator of these spiritual, immaterial aspects and is identified with the god of Christianity, who asks his followers to give up their individuality and freedom to become poor in spirit in service of him. Unlike the Gnostic movements like the Cathars, it is the devil who here is the god to actually be followed, rather than the restrictive god followed by Christianity. Ben Kadosh is also a significant figure who self-identified as a Luciferian and seems to have tried to actually create an occult group that focused on the worship of Satan. In his system, Satan or Lucifer had been misunderstood historically and could be identified with certain pre-Christian pagan deities, primarily the god Pan. In his famous work called The Nye Morgens Gry, Dawn of the New Morning, he lays down his interpretations pretty clearly. He says, "Thus, Lucifer in his entirety is a reality and no illusion, and to worship him, the hunted wolf, is proper. This little book, handed over to the judgment of its readers, will do its part in order for him, the persecuted, to regain his lost original standing." In both of these thinkers, Satan also becomes strongly associated with fertility and the pleasures and creativity of materiality. Here, we see the emergence of depictions of Satan with phallic symbolism, which is quite common still today. While very influential on later Satanism, none of these thinkers just mentioned actually created a fraternity or group that would survive, at least for long, after their own lifetime. For an example of the first organized satanic church, or self-proclaimed Satanist movement as such, we have to move all the way to the 1960s and the very famous activities of Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan. LaVey is a very interesting character in the 20th century. He grew up in Los Angeles, but eventually moved to San Francisco. Throughout his life, he was always interested in the occult, studying old grimoires, magic, and things like hypnotism. He claimed to be a circus lion tamer, a hypnotist, artist, musician, and much else. He also claimed to have worked as a crime scene photographer for the San Francisco Police Department, where he naturally had to witness some truly gruesome scenes of murders, dead bodies, and other horrors that strengthened his convictions as an atheist. To him, no good God could ever allow such terrible things. Eventually, in the late 1960s, amid the many countercultural movements that appeared at that time, he founded the Church of Satan, perhaps the clearest example thus far of an organized, self-identified form of Satanism, with certain principles, rituals, and an inner hierarchy. LaVey was a very eccentric and charismatic person in himself, dressing in unusual ways, living in an all-black Victorian home, and his brand of Satanism would become very influential. LaVeyan Satanism is essentially atheistic. They do not believe in the reality of an actual entity called Satan, and they naturally don't worship such an entity then. Instead, just like in many earlier reinterpretations of Satan in the 19th century, the devil is here a kind of symbol, a symbol of rebellion, of humanity and rationality, consciously precisely in opposition to religion and its restrictive and moralistic rules and teachings. There is no God, and religion goes against our natural human nature. It restricts us from living our natural life and taking part in the pleasures and experiences of the body. LaVey wrote, quote, "There is no God. There is no supreme, all-powerful deity in the heavens that cares about the lives of human beings. Man is the only God. Man must be taught to answer to himself and other men for his actions." LaVey Satanism teaches that we shouldn't look to some higher power for solutions to our problems or to blame for our misfortunes. Instead, we need to take personal responsibility for our lives. In a way, it's a kind of worship of the human being itself in all its bodily features. We should enjoy life and its pleasures without guilt as long as we don't hurt other people. The scholar Simony Holt says, LaVey proposes Satanism as a religion that centralizes one's own ego, wherein one's natural desires and emotions are not suppressed but exalted as a primary goal for Satanists. That is, the ideal Satanist seeks to fulfill personal goals professionally, personally, financially, without shame or apology. Embedded in this is also kind of social progressivism, because we should not be ashamed of any of our desires and wants, even if those happen to be that we are gay or bi or whatever preferences we may have. In every way, LaVeyan Satanism is thus a kind of anti-religion, although specifically aimed at Christianity perhaps, a critique and rebellion against everything that religion/Christianity stands for, at least according to them. And the mythology and symbolism of Satan and the occult is used as a provocation against that, an important aspect of the aesthetic presentation of the movement without ever claiming that the devil is a real entity. Although it should be pointed out that there have been some within the movement that lean toward a more theistic interpretation, perhaps most prominently Michael Aquino, who left the church in the 70s over these disagreements to instead form a movement known as the Temple of Set, which has a much more theistic leaning in their form of Satanism. In his famous Satanic Bible, LaVey outlines the 9 satanic statements, which are the following. 1. Satan represents indulgence instead of abstinence. Satan represents vital existence instead of spiritual pipe dreams. Satan represents undefiled wisdom instead of hypocritical self-deceit. Satan represents kindness to those who deserve it instead of love wasted on ingrates. Satan represents vengeance instead of turning the other cheek. Satan represents responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. Satan represents man as just another animal who, because of his divine spiritual and intellectual development, has become the most vicious animal of all. Satan represents all the so-called sins, as they all lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. Satan has been the best friend the church has ever had, as he has kept it in business all these years. There are also the so-called 11 satanic rules. 1. Do not give opinions or advice unless you are asked. Do not tell your troubles to others unless you are sure they want to hear them. When in another's home, show them respect or else do not go there. If a guest in your home annoys you, treat them cruelly and without mercy. Do not make advances unless you are given the mating signal. Do not take that which does not belong to you unless it is a burden to the other person and they cry out to be relieved. Acknowledge the power of magic if you have employed it successfully to obtain your desires. If you deny the power of magic after having called upon it with success, you will lose all you have obtained. Do not complain about anything to which you need not subject yourself. Do not harm little children. Do not kill non-human animals unless you are attacked or for your food. When walking in open territory, bother no one. If someone bothers you, ask him to stop. If he does not stop, destroy him. As you can tell, many of these points and rules have a kind of comical, humorous tone to them. And this is a prominent aspect of LeVitan Satanism and a lot of other forms of Satanism too. Because the whole movement is sort of in opposition to Christianity, it uses sometimes humor and sort of hyperbolical expressions in this sort of anti-religion, in a sense. And in this way, the aesthetics, the symbols, the language of Satanism, which is very theatrical, very colorful, and uses all these, sometimes humorous, sometimes not, but these, again, these aesthetics and these symbols and words, there's a point to all that, and that becomes especially clear in the actual rituals of the Church of Satan.
So Anton LaVey's take on ritual is that it's psychodrama. It can affect change in people through, of course, psychological means. So there's nothing necessarily supernatural going on most of the time.
Okay.
So there's an ambiguity there as well, where LaVey would sometimes speak of like tapping into a dark force in nature and things like that. And he was fond of making references to having, affected something supernatural at times. But it's a bit difficult to tell how serious he was about these things. For example, he could talk about causing an earthquake by playing his organ, or cutting something from a newspaper and then cutting off someone's head, and then that person died in a car accident where his head was cut off, that sort of thing. But as a whole, Anton LaVey's take on ritual is that it's psychodrama. So it's something that you stage to have the appropriate effect on yourself, and then it's very much centered on the self at all times. So sort of the effect that you want is modifying something in your own behavior. So it's very much sort of in tune with the pop psychology of the time, but with this sort of Halloween-y framework around it.
Often when talking about Satanism, people will divide it into two camps: atheistic Satanism and theistic Satanism. Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan is an example of the former category of atheistic Satanism, where the devil is an important symbol, but isn't worshipped or even believed in as a real entity. This is by far the overwhelmingly most popular and widespread form of Satanism, and is not exclusive to the Church of Satan, but also many other contemporary Satanistic groups most of them are atheistic. On the other hand, theistic Satanism denotes the opposite. These are people who actually believe in Satan as a real spiritual being toward whom worship or reverence is directed. This is definitely a more marginal category, and furthermore, this wider division is quite generalizing, as I'm sure you can see. We saw the Temple of Set and Michael Aquino as one example of such a theistic Satanism, but another example of a more explicit theistic Satanism can be seen in the early black metal movement, especially in the early 90s and in Scandinavia. Bands like the Norwegian Mayhem and its lead figure, Euronymous, drew heavily on satanic symbolism and imagery that had been quite common in certain earlier metal scenes, but here they took it even further. It wasn't just an aesthetic element of their image, but seemed to have been a very real conviction, where Satan as a force of evil was worshipped, and the music was a kind of extension of that. It's also true that several crimes and acts of violence were connected with these groups, including the burning of several churches in Norway and even a few murders. And we have to be careful when we talk about this, though, because this was the time of the Satanic Panic, where claims of satanic rituals and satanic murders were widespread. People were panicking over these, especially in North America and also in Europe to some degree. And this led to a lot of problems in the other direction, by people who were falsely accused of doing these things, when in most cases there was no substantiating evidence for any of this, right? So we see in the black metal scene, for example, there are some examples of theistic Satanists who even committed acts of violence like burning churches. But with that said, we always have to be careful not to fall into the trap of sort of putting fuel to the fire of the Satanic Panic, which in itself was, of course, very destructive. We must remember that even though there are cases like certain pockets of the black metal movement in the early 90s, this does not represent the vast majority of even self-proclaimed Satanists, even theistic Satanists. Indeed, even within the category of theistic Satanism, these cases are quite unique and very uncommon in the sense that they explicitly worship Satan as a representation of evil. thus in a way affirming the Christian interpretation of the devil, only directing worship to him instead of God. These black metal figures thus formulated their brand of Satanism not only in opposition to Christianity, but also in direct opposition to LaVeyan Satanism. But this is not the case for most other forms of theistic Satanism. Indeed, the more common way that this works is that this involves a reinterpretation of the character of Satan. We saw some examples of this in the early 20th century with people like Ben Kadosh and Przybyszewski, where the Satan that is indeed worshipped isn't the personification of evil. Instead, in these cases, the devil is reinterpreted to have been misunderstood throughout history, to represent older pagan deities or as a spiritual being that brings light and knowledge, gnosis. Important for this is that other common name for Satan, Lucifer, meaning the morning star or light bringer.